The story begins not with petty threats or imagined dangers, but with something truly monstrous. The greatest peril to humanity isn't the melons people joke about. It's this terrifying beast, mercilessly grinding helpless goblins into crimson paste. Only a few days earlier, something unnatural had crawled out from the icy capsules of an old, forgotten laboratory. The creature had a body sculpted for war, thick arms like iron beams, legs dull for crushing, and a form brimming with raw and terrible power. It remembered what it once was, though its name now echoed faintly in the ruins of its mind. Once, it had been called Unos, a human, but that man was gone, replaced by something unable to utter a single human word. All Unos could recall was volunteering or being forced into a military gene-boosting experiment. Back then, he was just a rookie thrown into an age shredded by endless wars as nations ripped each other apart across the continent. Yet now, in this strange silence, something caught his eye. The date on a broken console, year 1872 of the Northern Empire. When he had entered the program, it was 1648 and he'd been only 18. That meant he had been sealed away, asleep for over 2 centuries. As his sharpened gaze scanned the room, he spotted another lifeless form inside a neighboring capsule. He stood there in uneasy quiet, struggling to understand how time had swallowed nearly everything he knew. Questions flooded his head, each one louder than the last. Why had they kept him locked away? What happened to the Fedic Empire? Then memories of his family surfaced, faces smiling, fading, slipping into the mist of the past. Sadness pressed against his chest, but he pushed it down. With uncertainty thick in his veins and no answers in sight, Unos forced himself to move. He decided he would see what remained of the world beyond these frozen walls. The dark corridor stretched endlessly, lined with shattered glass and lifeless bodies frozen mid-rest. His claws brushed against something small, a matchstick, a faint tether to humanity. But before he could linger, a problem blocked his path. The great metal gate sealing the exit stood unmoving, lifeless without power. Still, the fact that his capsule had kept him alive meant some energy source had survived. Facing the massive gate, an anxious thought crossed his mind. Even in this monstrous form, could he move it? Then he saw it, his muscles bulging with strength beyond reason. Curious, Unos clenched his fist and hurled a punch into the steel. A thunderous crack echoed, followed by a stabbing pain that seared through his right arm. He crumpled, gripping it in agony, the sound of his own roar filling the empty hall. When the ache faded, he looked up at the gate still unmoved and couldn't help but give it a crooked thumbs up. The Empire built strong things, he thought bitterly. He realized brute force wouldn't save him. He needed another way out. The thought of dying trapped underground gnawed at him. No, he refused to meet his end here, confined like an animal. In frustration, he pounded the door again and again until fury gave way to reason. Slowly, calm sank in. This place was built to contain beings like him, to hold chaos itself. If he kept attacking, his body would break long before the metal would. A new plan began to take shape. As his claws scraped the dirt, a memory bled through the gene experiment. The scientists, what had they turned him into? That recollection brought inspiration. He dug his sharp claws into the seam of the gate and pulled with everything he had. The steel groaned and then, unbelievably, gave way. The sound exploded down the hallway. In that instant, he understood the experiment had succeeded. With one devastating swing, Unos shattered a wall itself. He tore through more walls until a vent shaft appeared. Climbing upward with inhuman strength, he finally broke into the open sky. For a long moment, he stood there, bewildered by the vastness around him. His senses sharpened, vision stretching like a zoom lens over unimaginable distances. But even with eyes enhanced beyond human measure, all he could see was the endless sea of trees. Not the empire he remembered, nor any forest he had known. The thought of what had happened to his world weighed heavily on him, but resignation slowly settled over his heart. Acceptance, or perhaps survival instinct. That's when he noticed another, darker truth. His emotions, gone silent, controlled. The ability to suppress all feeling, like a soldier conditioned for endless war. It helped him steady his mind, but the realization chilled him. They hadn't just built warriors, they'd forged weapons wearing human flesh. Still, Unos made his choice. He stepped to the cliff's edge. The wind roared, he leaped. His landing shook the earth, and in that moment he vowed he would never be a weapon again. As he ventured onward, the world greeted him only with ruins. Then, his eyes caught something, a colossal airship, long crashed and forgotten. Inside was rot and shadow, but he pressed on, determined. He uncovered a flight log and a stack of letters sealed with the crest of the northern kingdom of Canaan Jenga. The message was clear. The craft came from Canaan. The record spoke of a monstrous attack that had brought it down 2 centuries ago. The timing confirmed what Unos already feared. He sighed, heavy and hollow. The log showed the ship had fallen only 3 days after departure, which helped him approximate his position. Though hunger no longer gripped him, he forced himself to eat stale biscuits he'd found, more out of discipline than need. Then he turned eastward. There was said to be a village nearby, perhaps survivors, or at least answers. But a grim thought tugged at him. If that village still stood, how would they react to his monstrous appearance? His steps froze. A pungent, metallic stench filled the air, something foul and sharp enough to trigger every instinct in his body. Silently, he crept through brush, following the source. In the clearing ahead, goblins gathered, shrieking and cheering around their spoils. The sight disgusted him. They reminded him of creatures he'd once seen in crude stories, filthy caricatures of cruelty. A bitter nausea rose in him as pity mixed with rage. Clenching his fists tight, Unos emerged from the shadows. He knew he possessed power beyond human limits, but did it mean anything against these monsters? The goblins noticed him, their laughter fading into dread. His presence alone pressed against them like a storm. Without hesitation, his fist drew an arc through the air. The impact cracked like thunder, the shockwave blasting forward. In seconds, most goblins were torn apart or flung aside. Amid the chaos, a clarity dawned on him. This wasn't simply combat, it was annihilation. He was becoming their nightmare. When the battle ended, Unos surveyed the carnage. The goblins hadn't stood a chance. It wasn't a fight, it was slaughter. Yet, disturbingly, something inside him thrilled at the destruction. It felt unreal, like he was trapped inside a dark game with no exit. But when he noticed the blood glistening on his claws, nausea slammed into him again. Meanwhile, far from that scene, in a nearby village, a woman named Da'ara sighed and turned to her companion, Lazelek, asking if he'd brought any coin. Lazel only smirked, saying that finishing their job would boost her reputation more than any reward ever could. Da'ara rolled her eyes. There was nothing remarkable left to explore around this dull town anyway. Lazel muttered an apology, though his mind clearly wandered elsewhere. Catching his wandering gaze, Da'ara groaned, half amused, half irritated. If he weren't such a fool, she might have even returned that look. Just then, Lazel's sister Alinik arrived with a man named Gistash. Lina asked if he'd scouted the nearby forest yet. Da'ara interrupted, not wanting to hear another excuse. She called the nearby woods the vast florist forest, muttering its name like a curse. Not long after, Da'ara and Lina found themselves ambushed by goblins. Lazel and Gista were attacked too. Chaos tore through the group. Da'ara fell back, heart pounding, blaming it on terrible luck. The day before, Unos himself had faced a monster bigger than a house. One punch, and the creature crumbled. It wasn't victory he sought, it was hunger. He roasted the flesh over flame, the smell thick and wild. The moment the meat touched his tongue, his body rejected it violently. He vomited until his chest ached. Feeling pity even for the beast, he buried its remains. He realized he had to treat it like a human kill, draining the blood as custom demanded. It made him wonder, were his senses still human at all? He remembered the instant his mouth forgot how to speak words, the moment humanity slipped away. Yet still, he refused to give in. Somewhere inside, the man called Uno still breathed. Gratitude. He dreamed of reuniting with his sisters or their descendants someday. His family's bloodline had always been strong. Even if empires fell, surely they had survived. In time, he accepted his monstrous body, not as a curse, but as a chance to endure. Still, frustration simmered. He had strength but no voice, a beast that yearned to speak. He began weighing where he might go if the old empire was truly gone. The Esophutic Empire had once been humanity's greatest nation, its brilliance unmatched. If it had crumbled, perhaps the Northern Canaans, or even the Esophyl Republic, could offer refuge. The elves of Enhel cherished nature. Perhaps they would see him as part of it. But doubts gnawed at him. He'd heard that elves wielded magic, and magic could kill even monsters. Were there even male elves left? He recalled none. The southern lands were unthinkable, while the East Caesarea was home to elite monster hunters known as exterminators. Going there would be suicide. Thus, he turned north, toward Canaan, to find civilization and maybe, just maybe, acceptance. Yet, as he continued, he realized even his words, if spoken, might mark him as danger incarnate. Elsewhere, Da'ara sat by a dull campfire with her group, scowling. They were exterminators by trade, not lazy wanderers, she reminded them. Lazel told her to relax. Lina mentioned they were supposed to retrieve something, though none of them quite recalled what. Conversation turned sharp as whispers spread about elves taking over the old empire years ago. Treasure? Secrets? Science denied? Da'ara scoffed that the old lands contained only relics of human arrogance. The tension thickened until Lina's teasing laughter broke it, saying they looked more like picnickers than warriors. Lazel quickly shot her a warning. This profession had no room for carelessness. Da'ara chuckled despite herself. She admitted Lina was right. Her brother could be heartless, but at least he kept them alive. She apologized for snapping earlier. Lina forgave her easily, and the two exchanged warm smiles. Da'ara even joked she wished Lina were her sister. Gista told Lazel to speak, but he stayed quiet. None of them realized these would be their final peaceful moments together. Unseen eyes had already found them. The next day, a spireball ripped across the sky. It struck Lazel with a blinding explosion. His body slammed into a rock, crushed under the force. Gista shouted his name too late. Goblins poured from every side, chains snapping around Gista's limbs. He tried to break free, but an ogre the size of a tower stepped forward and crushed him. Lina's scream tore through the clearing as she watched her brother and friend fall. Da'ara froze, her blade quivering, forcing courage into shaking hands. But as the goblin horde advanced under monstrous command, even she felt it. Fear colder than steel. Da'ara had fought ogres and goblins before, but this time felt different. The devastation left by the Empire's collapse made everything harder, the land itself hostile and unfamiliar. Still, she refused to yield. She positioned herself in front of Lena and cast a blazing fire spell meant to shield them both. But before the flames could strike, a goblin stepped forward, chanting in a guttural tone. A glowing barrier shimmered to life, swallowing the fire whole. Diara's eyes widened. That shield was Elizal's, stolen by the creature after his fall. Her power was useless now. In an instant, she understood the truth. They were in grave danger with no chance of escape. Goblins lunged at Lena, dragging her down. Diara spun around, panic clouding her focus. The others seized the opportunity, their claws tearing at her defenses as she stumbled. Old, rough hands snatched at their clothes, vile laughter filling the clearing. Lena screamed, reaching out for help, guilt stabbing deep into Diara's chest like a blade. Their eyes met, both trembling, both terrified. If this was their end, Diara refused to let the goblins claim them. She steeled herself, ready to bite through her tongue and die on her own terms rather than in their grasp, when suddenly a thunderous crash split the night apart. The air went still. Goblins froze. Even Diara stared wide-eyed as a monstrous figure stepped into view. Unos, towering and silent amid the carnage. For a heartbeat, she could only wonder what kind of being was this. His eyes swept across the chaos. He saw the goblins tormenting Diara and Lena, their snarls fading into uneasy silence under his shadow. They hissed, furious at the intruder who had dared invade their domain. But Unos barely heard them. His attention was caught elsewhere, by the chaos, by the suffering, by something deeper. He had followed the stench of goblins, expecting only monsters, and instead found humans clinging to life. 2 men lay nearby, one barely breathing. A woman struggled amid the crowd. Even through confusion, Unos sensed their pain. Diara blinked as he violently hurled away the goblins assaulting Lena. A monster fighting for them? It made no sense. Her disbelief deepened when she spotted the goblin shaman from earlier, staff raised, chanting. The shaman's fireball launched straight at Unos. It struck and fizzled harmlessly. To Unos, it was no more than a brush of warm wind. His gaze locked onto the caster. In a blur, he charged forward. His clawed hand gripped the shaman's head and crushed it with a wet, decisive crack. Diara gaped, still holding the trembling Lena. The same fire spell that had annihilated Lizelle had done nothing to this creature. Then Unos turned to face the towering ogre leading the horde. He had missed it at first, too distracted by the humans and their terror. But now, he saw opportunity. The ogre could be a proper test of strength. The giant beast roared, swinging its massive club straight for Unos' skull. The air shook as it connected. Yet Unos didn't even flinch. The club splintered like wood against stone. Diara's blood ran cold. It was the same blow that had killed Gista, and this creature hadn't even blinked. To Unos, it was disappointing. With a grunt of boredom, he retaliated, hurling the ogre across the battlefield and into a cliff, bones shattering on impact. The goblins froze, stunned into disbelief. Blood gushed from the ogre's corpse like a gruesome fountain. Unos leapt after it, planting his foot hard onto the dying creature's head. One stomp, and the ogre was gone. He then turned to clean up whatever goblins remained, his movements precise, unstoppable. The fight became a blur of chaos and crunching bones. Amid it all, a strange sound escaped him, a soft, almost childlike laugh, foreign even to his own ears. When silence finally fell, he looked toward the women, now free but trembling. He wished that they wouldn't fear him now, that they'd see he meant no harm. But when he saw their tears, words failed him. Emotion welled up instead. Wanting to return the favor somehow, Unos began searching through the wreckage for something useful. He found a potion and a gleaming sword among Lizelle's belongings. Diara's eyes widened. She shouted for him to stop, pleading desperately, begging him not to take the sword. To her, it wasn't a weapon, it was legacy. Unos, unable to understand her language, hesitated only briefly. Then he recognized their insignia. The Canaan crest, from the flag he once raised long ago. Realizing who they were, he decided it best to leave, but Diara chased after him, shouting, trying to explain the sword's importance. He walked away anyway, clutching it firmly. To Diara, it was proof that monsters would always remain monsters. Yet rage burned brighter than fear. She vowed to hunt him until she took that sword back. Unos, oblivious, assumed she was only yelling nonsense. He sped up, embarrassed, and, despite himself, couldn't stop thinking how radiant she looked, even through anger. It was a pity fate would part them so quickly. Once again, the naive creature set his own troubles in motion. That night, guilt gnawed at him. The sword, it wasn't ordinary. It was a magic weapon that drew strength from arcane energy rare and expensive beyond words. It even managed to cut through his invulnerable skin, though his regeneration sealed the wounds fast. Still, Unos realized he had made a grave mistake. He had only wished to befriend Diara, to connect in some way, but now he pushed her away completely. There was no way to fix it. Meanwhile, back at camp, Lena begged Diara not to go after him alone. Tears welled as she embraced her friend tightly. Fear flickered in her voice. What if Diara ended up like Gista? But Diara gently shook her head. She wouldn't risk Lena's life again. She wouldn't let her suffer. She promised to survive, to make things right, and though the words caught in her throat, they carried the weight of a farewell. Deep inside, she knew there was only one way forward. Courage, not despair, would drive her now. She swore she would find Unos and retrieve what was lost. Far away, Unos wandered again, testing the limits of his hunger and exhaustion. He barely felt them anymore, yet he pressed on, almost human in his persistence. Then he noticed. Backpack he'd taken from Diara's group, crammed with potions, was falling apart. He sighed. He knew the bigger bag and maybe some salt for his cooking, he thought absently. There were many things he suddenly wanted. Food, tools, perhaps even companionship. He decided he'd look for them when he reached the next town. At dawn, he arrived at a desolate city, streets silent beneath the haze of morning dust. Rusting weapons lined the rooftops, anti-aircraft guns, their barrels still pointed at the sky. The Futic Empire had once been proud of these weapons, their greatest defense against flying monsters. Yet they had also provoked countless wars when the beasts fled into neighboring lands. The town had no walls, but the weapons were everywhere, suggesting it had once been part of the Empire's heartland. Una studied the faded iron signs and pieced together the location, northeastern Kuala. From here, two paths stretched ahead northwest toward Sloop Dill near Canaan, or east toward the old base at Roll Base Ats Karnizik. At least now, he thought, he knew where he was. But then, the stench hit him, that sickening, all-too-familiar odor of goblins. Instinct overrode thought. He dropped his bag and sprinted toward it. Ahead, a group of goblins were tossing a skull back and forth like a toy. Their laughter vanished the moment they noticed him. Before they could even scream, a massive shape burst through the trees, Unos, charging like a storm-given flesh. He hit them before they could react, ripping through their ranks with devastating precision. But mid-fight, he noticed something odd. Some goblins weren't fleeing. They were running together, in one direction. That wasn't normal. Goblins usually scattered like rats. Unos slowed, realizing they were protecting something. His claws tensed, readying another strike. Watching their strange coordination, suspicion grew. Someone or something was leading them. They were guarding it.id, whatever it was. Then he saw it. An old-school campus, half buried in vines. The gymnasium stood large against the mossy ruins. That had to be it, the heart of their nest. Unos charged forward, the awful smell growing stronger with every step. When he entered the gym, a shriek tore through the air. A massive, bloated goblin woman stared back at him, startled by his intrusion. Her scream shook the walls. He recognized her instantly, the Goblin Queen, the vile matron who spawned the endless hordes. His sharp mind calculated quickly she produced over 20 offspring every day, fully grown in less than a month. As long as she lived, their plague would never end. Determined, Unas decided to erase this infestation once and for all. The goblins rushed at him, desperate to defend their queen. For a fleeting moment, their loyalty struck him. It was almost touching. But mercy had no place here. His strikes came faster than their screams. In mere moments, only a handful remained, the queen cowering behind them. Unos held his ground, keeping his distance. The stench was unbearable, forcing him to attack from afar. He bent down, picked up a handful of stones, and weighed them carefully. The goblins stared, confused. He wasn't sure about his aim, but his target was big enough. He hurled the first stone, smooth and hard. It missed the mark, striking her shoulder instead of her head. Frustration flickered, but he steadied his claw. No hesitation this time. The next stone flew true slamming straight into her stomach with crushing force. The queen howled, staggering. The few goblins left froze, too terrified to help. And then, it was over. The Goblin Queen collapsed, her reign ending in silence. Unas stood over the carnage, pride flickering through him. He had stopped her for humanity, for those nameless elves he often imagined saving, but the stench clung to him like a curse. Grimacing, he sought a river and washed himself clean. When the cold water touched his skin, he felt alive again, body and spirit renewed. He wandered back toward the silent streets, eyes glimmering with something close to peace. For once, the monster smiled, curious about what this broken world might still hold for him. His eyes locked onto something magnificent, a shopping mall, frozen in time yet still standing. Without hesitation, Unos headed straight for the sports section and grabbed the largest backpack he could find. In the kitchen aisle, a heavy cast iron grill caught his eye. From home appliances, he selected a sturdy cooler box. Finally, he swept through the grocery section, gathering ancient salt, dusty canned goods, and whatever beverages hadn't completely spoiled. With his arms full of salvaged treasures, Unos felt for the first time in what seemed like forever, a flicker of normalcy, as if civilization itself still lingered in these forgotten aisles. Yet, even amid his excitement, one crucial task lingered in his mind. He hadn't forgotten. As he wandered, he snatched up every magazine and newspaper he could find. After 2 centuries, the pages crumbled at his touch, but the words remained stark and damning. The Empire had fallen into chaos. The elves of Enhelk had seized the Western Front. But what truly unsettled him was the complete absence of records after May 25, 1667's. The final articles he uncovered spoke of the Empire deploying its ultimate weapon, their last desperate gambit. Unos, once a loyal son of the Empire, couldn't shake the dread these faded headlines stirred within him. Had his homeland truly been erased from history? Fear clawed at him, but he knew he had to learn the truth, no matter how bitter, and that meant traveling to the imperial capital itself. Taking a slow breath, he forced himself to think strategically. First, he would visit Lukdil, a border town near Canaan, to gauge the state of the kingdom. Whatever awaited him, he would face it prepared. Meanwhile, in Lukdil, a nobleman requested an investigation of a nearby goblin nest. A dignified figure named Arniel agreed and tasked his team with the mission. Turning to a mercenary named Orlando, Arniel asked if he would handle it personally. Orlando smirked, telling the noble not to beg. It didn't suit him. He mentioned he'd just recruited fresh members, and this would be perfect training for them. Still, he demanded a higher fee. Arniel sighed but agreed. With a confident grin, Orlando declared that his team, Akatsuki no Sas, would take care of everything. The next day, a small cluster of goblins wandered carelessly through the forest. They had no idea Unos was already there, perfectly camouflaged against the trees. He had mastered a skill called mimicry, allowing his massive frame to blend seamlessly into the environment, invisible even at close range. But this wasn't the moment for games. Frustrated, he struck a nearby tree to test his strength. He needed to control his overwhelming power, especially when emotion threatened to overtake him. In broken thoughts, he muttered that the Empire's science was terrifying, yet he had to remain cautious. Though he didn't need sleep, the night before he had collapsed into unconsciousness without realizing it. Exhaustion could creep up on him. If he grew too tired mid-battle, it could mean his end. For now, vigilance was everything. Soon enough, Unos arrived at Ugluk-Dilk, its towering stone walls confirming it was the border town he sought. But then movement. Goblins were pouring out from the gates. Were they fighting the Seas Canaan forces? Using his mimicry, he decided to slip closer and investigate. He moved through the goblin ranks as effortlessly as scattering leaves. Like a shadow dissolving into mist, Unos vanished from sight. Inside, he spotted a group of soldiers, each wearing crimson cloth bound to their right arms, unmistakable insignia of a renowned Canaan military units. Roughly 50 soldiers were locked in fierce combat against 300 goblins. The humans were being overwhelmed, their backs pressed against crumbling walls. Unos tensed, fearing the worst outcome, until his eyes found Orlando at the front of the formation. Though he couldn't understand Orlando's words, Unos could tell. This man was a natural leader, calm even amid chaos. His swordplay was efficient, nothing extraordinary by Unos' standards, but more than enough to carve through goblin flesh. Just as Unos predicted, the 300 goblins fell swiftly under their coordinated assault. He chose not to scavenge among the bodies. The stench alone made his stomach turn. He wished he'd brought something to mask it. Then, the army's mage raised his staff and chanted a detection spell to search for survivors. A ripple of magical energy swept across the battlefield and brushed directly against Unos. He felt it tickle his skin. The mage's eyes widened, and he pointed straight at Unos' hiding spot. Fascinated but alarmed that magic was real, Unos tried to slip away quietly. But Orlando barked orders, commanding his troops to pursue the creature they detected. Unos leapt between rooftops with inhuman grace, yet the soldiers were faster than expected, closing in. He'd been too confident in his mimicry and hadn't noticed how near they were. He didn't want conflict with humans. The mage's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. A towering wall of flame erupted directly in Unos' path. He skidded to a halt as Orlando shouted something. His name, perhaps? Orlando leveled his blade at Unos, grinning with unshakable confidence. Anger flared in Unos' chest. Was this human mocking him? He hadn't wanted a fight, but rage stirred beneath his skin now. He wasn't sure if these soldiers could survive him. But it was Orlando who had issued the challenge first. Unos stepped forward, positioning himself directly before the armed group. Orlando faltered. He had assumed this was just another mindless beast, but nothing could have prepared him for the aura radiating from this creature. A woman named Annie muttered that the monster looked truly dangerous. Orlando admitted, his voice shaking slightly. That fear was beginning to creep in. He cursed under his breath, realizing Arniel hadn't paid him nearly enough for this. Quickly, he ordered the recruits to fall back, recognizing that the being before them was leagues beyond their strength. Watching the frightened humans retreat, Unos felt a flicker of respect for Orlando's tactical sense. Still, excitement surged through him. Finally, a chance to fight at full strength. Then Orlando's voice cut through the tension, commanding the team to attack. Mages and archers unleashed their volleys, but Unos walked forward through the storm of arrows and magic as if strolling through rain. Orlando's jaw tightened, watching in disbelief. Their strongest attacks weren't even slowing the creature down. The vanguard charged forward next, swinging swords and thrusting spears. But blades shattered against Unos' skin, weapons snapping like twigs. Realizing conventional tactics were useless, Orlando gripped his sword tighter and stepped forward himself. He saw the monster as nearly invincible, and that only made his blood burn hotter. Unos was glad to see Orlando take the lead. After all, he was the one who started this. He admired the speed of Orlando's strikes, impressive even with such a heavy blade, but it wasn't fast enough. Unos caught Orlando's sword mid-swing with his bare hand. Orlando and his soldiers froze, stunned by the effortless block. He could feel morale crumbling. This beast was beyond anything they'd ever faced. That's when Annie saw her leader in mortal danger. Without hesitation, she sprinted forward to assist him. Unis's attention shifted, a beautiful blonde charging straight at him, but he knew she had to be stopped. He swung a fist to intercept her. Annie ducked low, avoiding the blow with practiced ease. He blinked, caught off guard by her agility. But what shocked him even more was the crossbow she suddenly revealed from beneath her cloak. She fired. Unos watched, the bolt flying toward him in agonizing slow motion. Orlando and his team held their breath. Annie hit the ground, screaming that this thing was a true monster. Unos loomed over her, catching the arrow between his teeth and glaring down with primal intensity. Orlando saw Unos preparing to strike Annie and rushed to save her, but he was too far, too slow. Unos grabbed Annie as if she weighed nothing. She struggled desperately, but escape was impossible. Yet even in his grip, Unos couldn't help but notice the firmness of her build. Judging by the way her figure pressed against his thumb, he estimated, absurdly, that she was a size 4. To avoid hurting her, he chose to simply toss her aside gently, but to his astonishment, Annie slipped free mid-throw, leaving only her torn clothing behind as she used some kind of slick oil to escape, her form now fully exposed. Unos stared, stunned, revising his earlier estimate, definitely a size 5. Seeing Unos frozen in place, Orlando bellowed for a counterattack. They had to capitalize on Annie's bold sacrifice. The soldiers surged forward, weapons raised. But Unos, oddly moved by Annie's courage, decided to let them all go, just this once. As the soldiers charged from all sides, Unos moved like a shadow wrapped in steel. With flawless precision, he disarmed and subdued them one after another, never spilling more blood than needed. The battle slowed. He almost looked relaxed, as if stretching his limbs after a long nap. Orlando lunged back into the fight, determination burning in his eyes, but Unos effortlessly caught his sword mid-swing with one hand. Orlando froze, dumbfounded at the futility of his efforts. Then Annie rushed in again, her eyes fierce. This time, she wielded a shimmering magic sword, glowing with arcane light. She slashed across Unis's chest, and for an instant, a cut actually formed. He let out a low growl of pain, brief, almost human. But before her eyes, the wound sealed shut, skin regenerating faster than breath. Annie staggered back, her hope crumbling to dust. Orlando's heart sank. If even a magic blade couldn't hurt this creature, then their chances were non-existent. He knew they couldn't win, not today. His focus shifted solely to getting his people out alive. As he tried to draw Unis's attention, he wondered how long he could hold off such a monster. Then, to everyone's shock, Unos raised one finger calmly, almost like a teacher silencing a classroom. Instinctively, everyone halted, breath held tight. Slowly, Unos pointed directly at Orlando. The gesture carried weight, purpose. Orlando understood instantly. He could save them all by staying behind. A grim smile flickered. This was his chance. He turned and shouted for everyone to pull back. He explained that the creature wanted him alone, that this was now a duel. For a moment, even Unos realized his mistake. His earlier rampage had turned the fight into a slaughter, one without honor. Now, he wanted to correct it with a one-on-one confrontation. Annie called Orlando insane, demanding he not throw his life away. Orlando only laughed, softly promising he'd buy her a drink when they got home. Then, with a teasing smile, he warned her to cover up her melons before his inner beast woke up, an attempt to lighten the dread hanging over them. Annie's tears came anyway. "Idiot," she whispered. Orlando just smiled and said sorry. Deep down, he knew the truth. He had no chance. Their strengths were worlds apart. But if his death could spare his people, so be it. He still didn't understand why Unos wanted to fight him in particular, only that this creature had chosen him deliberately. Maybe, in its own twisted way, it respected him. A captain protects his crew. That duty was his to the end. Orlando took a steady breath, apologizing to Unos for making him wait. Then both raised their weapons, one monstrous, one human. The air trembled with tension, the energy between them sharp as lightning. Every onlooker could feel it. Annie clutched her hands, trembling for him. Unos made the first move. Orlando poised for the counterstrike, his sword flashing downward with everything he had, but Unos was far faster. "USU!" In one fluid motion, he caught Orlando's arms and lifted him as if he weighed nothing. The soldiers watched in horror, their fearless leader dangling helplessly like a child. Yet Orlando would not yield. With a burst of grit, he tore his right arm free from Unis's grasp. Reaching for his second sword, he tried to swing, only to realize his arm was too mangled to grip it. A flicker of clarity passed through his eyes. He had done all he could. "Orlando!" Annie and the others screamed. Unis's jaw opened wide, teeth gleaming ready to crush his head. But suddenly, he stopped. With an odd grunt, he spat Orlando out and flung him aside. Silence fell. Everyone stared, stunned. Unis dashed away into the trees, disappearing like a phantom. Orlando coughed, trying to make sense of what just happened. Had he offended the creature, or hurt it somehow? As the soldiers regrouped, Annie frowned and asked, "When was the last time you bathed, Captain?" Orlando blinked, then remembered. 3 years ago. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Unos clutched his stomach, nauseous. The stench still clung to his senses. He grimaced bitterly, unable to believe how filthy that man had been. He planned to fake defeat and retreat, but the odor had done the job for him. Muttering darkly, he swore vengeance on Orlando next time, though part of him laughed at the absurdity of it all. Still, he was glad to be alive and, truthfully, a bit amused that Annie's melons had been his only reward from that chaos. Just then, a new scent caught his attention. It was human blood fresh and not far off. He tensed, instincts sharpening. Time to investigate. Following the metallic trace, Unos found the source, a field of bodies. He knelt, head bowed, paying silent respect to the dead. Their wounds looked clean, deliberate, not monster attacks. These were human-made. Weapons and personal belongings were stripped away. Nearby, wagon tracks led deeper into the forest. Bandits, Unos realized. The thought of facing them stirred something dark inside him. They spilled innocent blood, so he would do the same to them. He followed the trail relentlessly until he reached a hidden camp. When he appeared, grinning with anticipation, every bandit froze in terror. Their leader stepped from a wagon, eyes narrowing, only to release a desperate scream as he saw Unos towering before him like death incarnate. Panic erupted. The bandits dropped their weapons and fled in every direction, their leader among them. Disappointed, Unos exhaled. He had hoped for at least one to fight back. The carriage probably held nothing valuable anyway, but when he peered inside, his thoughts halted. 5 women lay naked inside, trembling, beside them boxes stacked with stolen goods. He paused, silently taking in the haunting scene, and, despite himself, a faint grin formed at the irony of it. These women were cargo, bound for slavery. Though it stirred a strange amusement, he reminded himself of priorities. Supplies came first. If he wanted more, he'd have to find where the bandits hid the rest. After securing the carriage, he prepared to follow their tracks. A frail voice called out. The oldest woman, barely able to speak, asked if he was their savior. Uno stopped at the exit and turned his head slightly. For a heartbeat, his gaze softened, memorizing their faces, proof that humanity still existed. His small, playful grin baffled the women, but he said nothing to explain. Turning toward the wilderness, he lifted his nose to the wind, searching for the bandit's scent once more. The trail was clear. As he followed, Unos felt a strange pride in the Empire's science. They'd made him strong, resilient, nearly perfect, but also broken. He had lost language and, his mushroom as he called it, a quiet joke with no one to hear. Still, weapons were unnecessary to him now, yet sentiment lingered, and he kept Lazelle's enchanted sword at his side. Stashing his pack behind some bushes, he pressed on. The scent led into a cave, damp and deep. Using his disguise skill, he melded into the shadows and entered unnoticed. The place was more organized than expected, strange for a bandit den. No guards waited outside. Frowning, Unos guessed turmoil might have erupted within. The tunnels were surprisingly neat at first, until he reached a chamber littered with skeletons and rotting corpses. Among them lay the small remains of a mother and child. For the first time in a while, disgust clawed at Unis's chest. These weren't mere criminals. They were monsters in human skin and beyond redemption. Then came the screams, wails of pain echoing from deeper inside. Unis paused, listening. The bandits were begging their leader for mercy. Their cries were cut short by violent sounds, slashing, gurgling, likely punishment for losing the carriage. Unis felt no pity. Moments later, a cruel voice thundered through the cave, growling words he could barely understand. It was a man or something close speaking in broken as Canaan dialect. Unos strained to catch the meaning. The leader raged over his men's cowardice, furious that they'd fled from a terrifying monster. That word drew Unos' attention sharply. Maybe these bandits weren't just thieves. Maybe they were part of something far larger, a network. Rich targets, rich spoils. The idea sparked a dangerous gleam in his eye, treasure hunting in his own brutal way. Then silence. Unos guessed the leader had slain his subordinates. With fewer foes left, the time to strike had come. But the cave's entrance to the inner chamber was narrow too tight for his massive form. Frustration welled up. If he went in wrong, he might get trapped, but there was no choice. He charged forward, smashing through stone and door alike with an earth-shaking impact. Amid the debris, he even muttered a half-apology for breaking in so violently. Then he froze. What stood before him wasn't human. A creature loomed in the darkness, half woman, half spider. Its mandibles twitched as it glared. To Unis's surprise, it spoke flawless, Fletic, the imperial tongue. "So," it hissed, voice echoing like silk over steel, "you're the beast who stole my women?" Unos stood motionless, confusion tightening his chest as he struggled to grasp the reality before him. The world seemed to pause, as if even time hesitated to move until he understood what he was witnessing. Then it struck him, like a cruel mirror held up by fate. He realized the creature before him wasn't so different after all. Both of them were test soldiers, forged by the Empire's ruthless experiments. The revelation tasted bitter, like betrayal wrapped in steel. Elsewhere, Argyle was startled to see Orlando looking unexpectedly tidy, his appearance neat for once. Suspicion flickered in his eyes. Sensing Argyle's strange expression, Orlando tilted his head and asked what was wrong. Instead of answering, Argyle questioned when Orlando had last bathed. The jab caused a flicker of recognition in Orlando's eyes, and he gave a rueful chuckle, admitting it had been some time. He explained how Annie and the rest mocked him for smelling like a goblin, which finally pushed him to clean up. Then his tone grew somber. They had managed to eliminate the goblins, but the news he carried now was far darker. A new kind of monster had appeared. Despite fighting together, their combined might hadn't even scratched the creature. His voice cracked as he revealed the truth. 7 of their men had fallen, leaving their hopes shattered. Orlando described the being with haunted eyes, humanoid in shape, yet oversized. Its body shrouded in gray and a tail twitching with unnatural grace. Neither steel nor spell could harm it. The monster wasn't just strong, it was fast, cunning, and terrifyingly intelligent. A creature born of nightmares. A shiver slipped down Orlando's spine as uneasy laughter escaped him, as though to drive away the fear that clung to him. Argyle asked if the Titan Slayer, Orlando's prized weapon, had made any difference. With a defeated sigh, Orlando admitted it hadn't even landed a blow. The weight of truth settled between them like fog. They both knew what that meant. When Argyle asked for a plan, Orlando countered that only a magic sword and an extraordinary wizard might tip the odds. When Argyle worried about what would happen if the Night Order met such a beast, Orlando's grim reply was simple. They'd be crushed. Argyle rubbed his temples, dreading the task of reporting it. Orlando reminded him it was his responsibility. Argyle ordered him to handle the creature. But Orlando's prized weapon had only a magic sword and an extraordinary wizard might tip the odds. When Argyle worried, if more of those appear, Orlando muttered grimly, we'll be doomed. His words echoed like a curse neither wanted to believe. Meanwhile, the spider-like being mocked Unos mercilessly, sneering that he merely stood there and watched. Hearing familiar words in his own tongue jolted Unos. Studying the creature's eerie form, he suspected they shared a grim origin. He tried to explain that they both came from the same empire, but to the Spider-Man his words were nothing but animalistic growls, a meaningless roar. Understanding this, Unos made a desperate decision. He would communicate by writhing on the ground, but the moment he tried to lift his arm, panic set in. He couldn't move. His body refused to obey. Then he noticed the glimmer of translucent threads holding him fast. He was trapped. Stay still, the Spider-Man warned coldly, until I tell you otherwise. Unos' mind raced. When had he been ensnared? How had the webs encircled him without his noticing? The spider-like creature began ranting, voice trembling with fury. He smashed the corpses of his own fallen team, each strike echoing with rage and disappointment. His lament twisted into spite as he muttered about losing his precious mushroom. His words grew darker. With a cruel smirk, he bragged about tormenting a mother and son simply for amusement. A horrifying connection dawned on Unos. He remembered that mother and child he had once seen among the prisoners. Realization hit like a dagger. The monster before him was their tormentor. The spider-like being scuttled about, frantic and unhinged, seeking a new hiding place for his next victim. That was when Unos made his move, sudden, sharp, and fueled by fury. The Spider-Man barely leapt aside, evading the crushing blow that could have ended him. In that suspended moment, Unos understood the creature's rage. It too had lost its treasured things, its purpose twisted beyond recognition. Yet whatever pain it bore, it was no excuse. This being was beyond redemption. Unos resolved with quiet rage. He would end this creature's reign right here and now. For the first time, fear flashed across the Spider-Man's face as Unos tore through his webs with brute strength alone. The realization hit Unos. Spider-Man didn't even recognize their shared origin as experimental soldiers. But one look told him the monster was readying another attack. Cold instinct urged him to be cautious. For now, he stepped back, calculating every motion. His goal was clear: cut himself free from the remaining webs. He grasped the fallen bandit's body still tangled in silk and dragged it closer. Seeing the intricate trap laid across the battlefield, Unos recognized how meticulously Spider-Man had planned this fight. Spider-Man sneered about the monster's audacity and cunning, though inwardly he was shaken. Unos wasn't supposed to be this intelligent. Then Unos hurled the ensnared body forward, using it as a decoy. The distraction worked. Spider-Man's focus faltered for a heartbeat. Unos lunged, aiming to crush the creature's skull and end this nightmare. His hands closed briefly around Spider-Man, but the slick form escaped, slipping through his grip like oil. Shock rippled through Unos. The creature had molted, abandoning its skin so it could flee. The shed husk oozed an acidic slime that hissed as it touched the ground. Pain ripped through Unos' body as he fell to his knees, feeling flesh burn. Spider-Man laughed cruelly, spraying him with toxic venom for good measure. The liquid seared across Unos' body. The laughter faded into the distance, leaving only agony and silence. The world blurred as numbness crept through his veins. Unos realized the venom was killing him. If he didn't act soon, this would be his end. Then, like a spark in the darkness, he remembered Diara's potion. Unsure if it would work, he forced himself to move, staggering toward the cave's exit. Every step burned. Outside, he retrieved the small vial from his pack. With trembling hands, he poured the potion onto the wound, muttering a desperate prayer. Slowly, miraculously, the numbness faded, replaced by warmth and sensation. Within moments, the agony eased. He was alive again. His body remained battered and thin, bones visible beneath torn flesh, yet gratitude filled his chest. Potions, he now grasped their true worth. He whispered thanks to Diara. Though he had stolen the potion from her, his gratitude was genuine. This pain, this raw vulnerability, it terrified him. He hadn't felt it since awakening. The thought chilled him. The spider-like creature still lived. If it turned its venom on humans, the suffering would be endless. Unos never saw himself as a hero, but standing idle while monsters preyed on innocence was something he couldn't stomach. A man of reason and dignity, he refused to let corruption reign. He needed no reason to fight. His resolve alone was enough. His senses sharpened as the last traces of pain vanished. The scent of the monster filled his nose again. He knew exactly who Spider-Man was after now. High above, Spider-Man perched silently on a tree branch. Below, a carriage rumbled down the dirt road. Inside sat the same woman Unos had previously saved. She had caught the spider's twisted fascination. He marked her as his next prey, savoring the thought of how to torment her first. But then, a rustle. A sound from the nearby trees disrupted his cruel intentions. Turning sharply, he spotted Unos, hand full of stones and eyes burning with fury. The sight froze him. That monster still alive? Impossible. Unos hurled a stone that whistled past his head. Spider-Man scrambled to dodge, stunned by his persistence. Rage flared in him. At this rate, his prey would slip away. And worse, Unos wasn't falling for his traps anymore. The idea unsettled him, a lowly experiment growing smarter by the minute. Unos gathered more stones, muscles tightening with precision. His aim had improved, honed by countless fights with goblins. He knew he had to buy time. The carriage needed to get far enough away. The fight was no longer just a clash of strength. It was now endurance against desperation. Snarling, Spider-Man decided to charge head-on. Anticipating the move, Unos leapt back, widening the gap. "Stop running!" the spider hissed in fury. Unos' only answer was another stone soaring through the air. Spider-Man dodged again, agile and hateful. Unos maintained his distance, always just out of reach, forcing the creature to chase in frustration. Then, driven past reason, Spider-Man snapped. He vanished in an instant. Reappearing above, he unleashed another torrent of venom. But Unos had been waiting for this. He predicted the attack, knowing the spider preferred escape after each strike. With perfect timing, he dodged aside and grabbed hold of a tree trunk. Using its strength, he swung around and repositioned himself swiftly. From a new vantage point, he kept his distance, eyes reading every twitch of his foe's limbs. His plan was simple: advance when the monster retreated, withdraw when it lunged, and use the forest itself as a weapon. When the time came, he'd tear a tree from the ground and hurl it with everything he had. It was direct, effective, and repeatable if needed. "Fight fair, you monster," Spider-Man snarled. But Unos refused to acknowledge a creature he considered beneath morality. This was no duel of honor, it was a relentless hunt. Days passed as Unos pursued Spider-Man, never relenting, never yielding, always just close enough to keep the creature from disappearing for good. Spider-Man's stamina broke first. Time lost all meaning. It felt like centuries since their terrifying dance began. He couldn't understand how Unos still chased him, how he had become the hunted. Exhaustion blurred his mind. Hunger clawed at his insides, for Unos had denied him rest or prey. Even his thread-spinning ability had collapsed. Suddenly, a rock struck one of his legs with a sickening crack. Pain flared real, burning pain. It stunned him. He wasn't supposed to feel this. "Why?" he screamed inwardly. "Why must I suffer like a mere experiment?" Blinded by rage, he hurled himself toward Unos. More stones greeted him mid-charge, crushing his other legs and halting his advance. Unos stood tall, an unyielding force like a pitcher sending every throw straight into Destiny's heart. The Spider-Man collapsed, writhing on the ground, powerless and broken. He crawled pitifully, sobbing like a starving child, desperate for an escape that wouldn't come. Unos approached silently, his shadow falling over the trembling creature, before seizing it by the throat, ready to end everything at last. With a feral roar, Unos tore the creature's human torso from its spider-like lower half in one brutal motion. The Spider-Man screamed, his twisted body convulsing in raw animal pain. Unos grabbed the mangled figure like a shattered doll and began walking toward a nearby tree, his expression unreadable. Pressing Spider-Man's face hard against the rough bark, he pinned him there without mercy. Then, with slow, deliberate strokes, Unos carved something into the tree's surface. The spider-like being winced, confused, and tried to focus through the pain. His eyes widened in horror when he realized what Unos was etching into the wood letters, words, a message. The truth struck him like lightning. This creature, Unos, was one of his kind. Another experiment, another living weapon created by the Empire's cruel science. Terror replaced his earlier pride. The Spider-Man pleaded frantically, insisting that they were the same, that they shouldn't fight, that they should stand as allies. But before he could finish, Unos slammed his fist down, silencing him forever. The forest absorbed the sound, leaving only an eerie stillness. Breathing heavily, Unos stood motionless. He reflected coldly that although they shared the same origin, he could never and would never be like that monster. Days later, under an amber sky, our solitary protagonist stood on a cliff's edge, gazing out at the vast horizon, quiet yet resolved, like a ruler surveying his domain. To the audience's surprise, Unos had already crossed into the Elven lands, the Einhell Republic. He half-jokingly apologized for keeping everyone waiting for the so-called elf arc. As for his mission in Canaan, he had wrapped that up quickly after slaying the spider monster. From there, he journeyed to the border city between Canaan and Einhell, where he discovered that something had changed. Canaan, once a hub of advanced tech and invention, had turned back to primitive defenses. They'd abandoned their machines and relied once again on old wooden ballistas. In contrast, Einhell stood proud yet restrained, an elf nation that worshipped the balance of nature. But this harmony had a cost. Monsters flourished. For elves, that wasn't an issue. For humans, it was a nightmare. The frontline cities should have been bastions of modern defense, yet the ballistas, nothing more, like ghosts of an era that refused to die. Unos sighed bitterly, feeling disappointed in Canaan. He had expected better from such a nation. Turning away, he made for his usual lookout post, a high ridge overlooking the elven wilderness. 2 weeks passed since his arrival. During that time, he had learned much about the elves, perhaps more than any outsider should know. They were breathtakingly beautiful, yes, but there were men among them too, graceful and proud in their way. Unos learned that elves wielded magic unlike anything human. They didn't chant or need incantations. Their magic was instinctive, flowing freely from nature itself. They could cast endlessly, their power vast and effortless. Unos couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. It hardly seemed fair. Magic was their breath, their daily companion. They used it for everything, to heat meals, lift objects, wash clothes. It was art woven into life. But even so, that wasn't what made elves dangerous. Their true threat was something else entirely. Climbing up to his hidden vantage point, Unos wondered if this was the moment he had been waiting for. Then something dazzling entered his sight. Tall as a man. The elves themselves. Even at a distance, their beauty was disarming, their elegance unreal. He had heard the legends, but seeing them in person left him stunned. He had met more than 100 elven women during his observations, yet each one seemed carved from light. Unos continued his quiet watch, observing this alluring but perilous race, before moving to a new position. From his next vantage point, he activated his enhanced vision, his focus sharpened. There among the trees stood Elf Number 6, as he called her. She bathed by a stream with several children, her laughter ringing soft and melodic. Her kind eyes and gentle nature made her stand out. She was a teacher, always surrounded by her young students. But something about her felt different, dangerous even. Watching her up close was mesmerizing, but Unos felt an unexplainable tension building. As her clothing clung to her skin, the innocent sight strangely unsettled him. His zoom lens enhanced every detail, and though the view was crystal clear, the intimacy of it made him momentarily forget his mission. Then, chaos. One of the boys yanked at her drying clothes, laughter echoing through the forest. The children began mischievously tugging and teasing, while the young woman tried to scold them gently. Her sweet composure only encouraged them more. Unos silently shook his head, calling them foolish in thought, but secretly he was amused. Naturally, the prank ended with the children getting scolded, and Miss Elf Number 6 gathering them to leave. As she departed, Unos whispered his familiar farewell compliment into the breeze, as though in ritual, wishing her well and giving the boys imaginary applause for their trouble. Just then, a chill ran down his spine. 2 immense forces were nearby. He froze. Number 8 appeared far sooner than expected. His heartbeat quickened, a bead of sweat sliding down his neck. Number 8 was no ordinary elf. Her aura commanded attention. 2 attendants flanked her constantly, marking her as someone of high standing. Perhaps nobility, perhaps worse. She moved with silent grace, always keeping her eyes closed during her bathing ritual, a mystery wrapped in serenity. There was power in her stillness, danger in her calm. Unos dared not blink. Every motion mattered. Despite his racing pulse, excitement and dread entwined within him. She was beautiful yet terrifying beyond words. Later that night, deep in his temporary shelter, Unos sat in silence. The emptiness gnawed at him. He stared at his meager meal, remembering that paralyzing helplessness, the same hunger that had once nearly undone him. A fleeting memory surfaced, the Spider-Man's fury over his lost mushroom. The memory brought a chilling revelation. Unos had lost his own mushroom too. He thought of how skillfully that creature wielded its powers, how disciplined it once was before madness took over. Perhaps loneliness had driven Spider-Man insane, an isolation so deep that it twisted the mind. Pity stirred in Unis's chest. For the first time, he wondered if he too might one day fall into that same darkness. But when he finally turned his gaze back toward the stars, peace settled over him. His systems, the ones built to suppress emotion, had kicked in just in time. They spared him from drowning in despair. Sky dimmed as afternoon slipped into dusk. He decided to keep busy hunting, gathering, anything to quiet his thoughts. He knew elves avoided the rivers after dark. With calm precision, he cleaned and bled a deer he had caught, slicing neat portions of meat. When he cooked it, the flavor was dull, no salt, no spice, just survival. After the meal, he rested, lying down beneath the rustling canopy. Yet sleep refused him. He rolled over, then pushed himself upright, thoughts tumbling. The memory of Spider-Man lingered. If they were more like them, more experimental soldiers, they would likely be in the Imperial capital, and Unos had other reasons to go there, reasons he hadn't dared to face yet. He had always sensed that his journey would lead him back to the Empire. The Empire that remained was not the one he had known. It was now a sprawling forest of ruins and beasts. World there had stopped moving, frozen in time since May 2nd. He knew what tragedy had consumed it. Yet part of him refused to let go of hope. Perhaps somewhere, the Empire still endured, in fragments, in memory, in spirit. He feared, however, that if he ventured too far into solitude, he might end up just like Spider-Man. So he busied himself again, studying the elves from afar. But even he could not deny it anymore. This was avoidance, a fragile wall against truth. Finally, he decided it was time. He would go to the Imperial capital. The next morning, he packed his things carefully, securing each item like ritual. Before departing, he made one last climb to his favorite cliff to silently say farewell to the elves who had unknowingly kept him company. Down below, Miss Elf number 6 was bathing again, laughter soft against the rushing stream. Unos paused, watching quietly. Leaving was harder than he thought, but he forced himself to turn away. It was time to move on. Meanwhile, far away, Diara dreamed, a memory from childhood replaying like a haunting melody. An old magician had once told her, to master true magic, one must cast off everything, even clothing. Though embarrassed, the young Diara obeyed, believing the words carried wisdom. But what she truly wanted was not power, it was home. The warmth of her parents, her small village. When she finally returned, that home no longer existed. It was ash, rubble, silence. Everyone was gone. Diara jolted awake, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. That nightmare, no, that memory was the worst she'd ever relived. Morning found her walking through the familiar streets of Rikal in the Canaan kingdom. A conversation from days prior echoed in her thoughts. A woman's voice. That woman led a group of 5 survivors, the same ones Unos had rescued. She had already spoken with the Ya guard, selling fragments of her story. But deeper truths, she said, required payment. Diara hesitated, then handed her a silver coin. The woman smiled slyly, complimenting Diara's generosity before asking what she sought. Everything, Diara replied. Every detail you can remember. The woman shrugged, reminding her that a single coin didn't buy much. Still, she'd share one thing. Began her story, how she and others had been captured and dragged toward the bandits' hidden base. But before their torment could begin, a gray monster appeared, destroying everything in its path. The bandits had fled in raw terror. Only after witnessing the monster herself did she understand why. Diara pressed for details. What about the carriage attack? The woman admitted ignorance. The creature had rummaged through their carriage as if searching for something. Then, without warning, it stopped, stared at them for a moment, and vanished into the distance. It had returned once more before finally leaving them unharmed. The woman half laughed, suggesting that maybe the creature had been obsessed with their looks, particularly their figures. A ridiculous rumor, but one people whispered nonetheless. They were set free afterward but remained wary on their way home. Before leaving, the woman complimented Diara's own beauty, her tone dripping with familiarity. She even teased that someone like Diara could make a fortune working at a brothel. Diara wasn't sure whether to be flattered or insulted, but she decided to remember the woman's face. There might come a day when she'd need her help again. As Diara stepped out of the brothel's shadow, the streets buzzed with distant murmurs. Somewhere close to Canaan's borders, she sensed the monster moving, quietly, steadily. Her steps slowed as she passed a group of young adventurers chatting excitedly about how to spend their earnings. A bittersweet smile crossed her face. She saw herself in them. At 8 years old, she too had been a bright-eyed apprentice, chosen not for talent but for the wrong reasons. Her mentor, she realized too late, had never sought a pupil, only possession. Though others around her were kind, something precious was taken. Still, she persevered, studying relentlessly, growing stronger as an adult. But when she returned home, monsters had already erased everything she loved. The grief reshaped her. She could no longer rest while such beasts existed. From that day on, she became an adventurer. Every mission was a chase, every fight a test. Life and death blurred together, and though betrayal and pain followed, she pressed forward. Her resolve to vanquish every monster that walked the land burned brighter than fear. During that relentless pursuit, she met the sisters Rhea and Losel, whose compassion gave her new purpose. They invited her into their group, a rare gesture of trust. Diara accepted. Soon after, Giesta joined too, rounding out the team. She had thought camaraderie was something she could walk away from, but after countless perils, laughter, and shared grief, she realized how much they mattered to her. On one mission, when Losel could barely stand, he still managed to slay an ogre and claim a magical sword as their spoils. Giesta laughed in disbelief, while Lena, tending his wounds, told him to stop moving. When Lascelles asked what to do with the weapon, Diara spoke firmly. It should go to their leader. You earned it, she said. Now prove you're worthy of it. That small band of adventurers had become Diara's only true home, a place of warmth and belonging in a cruel world. Yet as always, monsters found a way to rip from her the very people she cherished most. The sword Unos had left behind became her symbol, proof that a bond and a promise once existed. Clutching it, Diara swore she would reclaim her home no matter the cost. She also vowed to find Lena again, and somewhere in her heart she whispered to the wind, asking Lena to wait just a little longer. Far away, Unos trudged through what remained of an ancient battleground. The ruins whispered stories of violence long past, every pillar etched with scars of forgotten wars. He departed from Einhell and was racing southeast toward the imperial capital. By nightfall, his relentless pace led him to the old ruins, a place steeped in silence. Judging from its desolate position, he guessed it had once been the town of Adresse, yet it was so decayed he could hardly be sure. He suspected lingering elven magic in the air, its faint residue almost tangible. After watching elves in secret for 2 weeks, he half-jokingly thought they owed him something for all his surveillance. Throwing a half-smile and an awkward thumbs up, he mimicked the manner of a politician seeking attention. Of course, the forest offered no applause, so he moved on through the dark. Night thickened, but fatigue never found him. His inhuman body simply kept running, untiring and unstoppable. He dashed through shadow and silence until, far ahead, a familiar silhouette broke the horizon. A tall structure emerged from the haze, something ancient yet enduring. As he drew closer, recognition lit his eyes. The Shubharu Iron Tower, one of the Empire's great monuments. Though it leaned dangerously to one side, it still stood after centuries, defying collapse. The brilliance of Imperial engineering echoed in its iron bones. For a fleeting moment, Unos remembered visiting the tower with his family long ago. The memory softened his eyes. For a brief heartbeat, the unstoppable soldier was just a son again, lost in nostalgia. Then chaos broke the calm. Goblins poured from the shadows, feral, foul-smelling, their shrieks slicing through the still air. Unos had sensed them before they appeared, their stench unmistakable. But even he was surprised by how many there were. The thought flashed in his mind. Perhaps a goblin queen was among them. A wild grin broke across his face. Perfect. After everything, a chance to vent his pent-up rage. His gaze cut through them like a blade, and fear rippled through the mob. By dawn, silence ruled the battlefield. The earth was soaked crimson, and fragments of goblin flesh littered the ground like foul confetti. Nothing moved. The air was thick with the iron scent of blood. At the center lay the Goblin Queen, her monstrous body surrounded by her offspring, all equally still. Without looking back, Unos continued his journey. The fight had taken longer than planned, but soon he reached the outskirts of a town, Aik. Focusing his enhanced vision, he peered ahead. What he saw made his chest tighten. The town wasn't just in ruins, it was dead. Every surface was coated in dull gray ash, the color of death. Everywhere else the world had been green, vibrant, but not here. Something catastrophic had happened. His instincts screamed that something unnatural had unleashed this destruction, and they had never been wrong before. Corpses lay scattered, blackened beyond recognition. He wondered if elves could have caused such devastation, but even they wouldn't scorch the land to such emptiness. He recalled an old article dated May 2, the Empire's final day, describing the rumored ultimate weapon. He hadn't wanted to believe it then, but now, as he stood in the waste of Aik, he knew. The Empire had done this to its own world. The so-called ultimate weapon had truly been unleashed. He longed for rest. His body had not stopped since leaving Einhell or defeating the goblins, but time refused him mercy. The truth waited ahead. He had to reach the capital. Suddenly, Unos froze mid-step. His path opened before him into emptiness. He had known all along what he would find. He just hadn't wanted to face it, because the answer would shatter whatever ties he still had to his homeland. But there it was, the truth, vast and undeniable. Before him yawned a colossal crater, carved by an explosion so violent that it had erased everything. Unos leapt down into it, his feet sinking softly into the sand-like soil. He had never seen the sea before, but he imagined the sand might feel something like this, cold and endless. Staring around the crater's rim, he wondered how many bombs it had taken to carve such a wound into the earth. And then he understood why Canaan had turned its back on science. This crater was the answer, it was the price of progress. A lone survivor of the Empire's legacy, Unos now burned with the need to uncover what truly happened to his world. Yet deep down, he asked himself whether the Empire's ambition had always been doomed. Rage surged through him, and his voice tore through the silence, a roar of fury and mourning. 2 days later, Unos returned to Einhell. He watched the elves from the shadows, eyes sharp but tired, greeting the unseen audience of fate itself. His homeland was gone, destroyed by its own hand. The truth was unbearable. The Empire hadn't been defeated by an enemy, but by its own creation. And now, his only path forward was to uncover the greatest threat on the continent, the elves, and understand their true nature. Ever methodical, Unos turned his curiosity toward the daily rhythms of elf life. Yet beneath that calm observation lurked denial. Part of him still clung to the impossible hope that someone from the Empire might be alive, continuing the work that could make him human again. That last hope crumbled as he remembered the crater proof that their science had destroyed everything it touched. Though he didn't hate the body he had now, a deep yearning gnawed within him. He wanted to feel human again, to belong. But how could he, a creature of steel and sinew, return to the warmth of mankind? Even so, watching the elves, especially the mysterious number 8, brought him strange comfort. Her movements, her aura, something about her kept the darkness in his mind at bay. Their mere presence grounded him, keeping the thin thread of his sanity intact. Perhaps it was their unknowing companionship that saved him. He started to wonder, what if this was his fate? If he could never turn back, perhaps the only answer left was to accept and live as the monster he had become. He had seen what defying destiny did to others. Over time, he accepted his life, his body, his strange half-existence. Yet even in that acceptance, Unos nurtured a fragile spark of humanity. He still found moments of beauty, small rituals that reminded him he was alive. That was enough, at least for now. Still, one constant disappointment haunted him: the food. No matter what he hunted, no matter how much meat he prepared, it all lacked taste. He craved salt. The salt in this kingdom was vile, impure. He hated stealing, had long sworn never to. But hunger for real flavor pushed him past that principle. With reluctant resolve, he decided he'd return to Canaan to obtain better salt. And so, the monster once more began his journey. Meanwhile, back in Canaan, Orlando looked uneasy. One of his subordinates shot him a sharp glare, scolding him for still being illiterate. Orlando sheepishly claimed that knowing how to sign his name was good enough. But his teammate wasn't having it. Everyone else was studying to improve, they said. Yet their captain barely lifted a finger. Sighing, Edward, the group's tactician, volunteered to read the latest report aloud for him. Orlando thanked him, trying to sound casual, but his tone only deepened Edward's irritation. According to the report, a nearby goblin village had been annihilated overnight. Edward doubted it until they encountered something deadly themselves, a new kind of monster. Then, both men understood. It was the same creature. The being known now as Unos had been labeled a disaster-level threat. Officially, it hadn't yet caused massive casualties, but Orlando could read beneath the words. The creature was far more dangerous than the records implied. He knew the bounty on its head would skyrocket soon. With reckless excitement, Orlando vowed that their team would be the ones to capture it. Edward blinked at his captain's sudden energy, then smirked, teasing that Orlando looked like a man dreaming about profit, not duty. He warned him to control that fiery greed. Orlando laughed awkwardly, but admitted that the team did need funds after their weapon purchases. The armory had cost a fortune. Recruiting fresh mages, he added, would help even the odds. Edward countered that good mages were rare. Even the mighty Caesarea kingdom struggled to find them. Orlando nodded grimly. Maybe, he joked, a skilled mage will show up at our door begging to join. Then, grinning smugly, he added, preferably one with curves. Edward chuckled, threatening to tell Annie about that comment, which immediately made Orlando panic. Wait, why bring her up? He yelped. Teasing further, Edward suggested they unwind later with a fine tavern wine, a bottle aged 2,000 years. Orlando knew it was expensive, but caved with a reluctant sigh, agreeing to buy the round. Unfortunately, Annie walked in right as he said it. Her eyes lit up. Drinks on Orlando? She announced cheerfully, prompting cheers from the team. Orders flew around before Orlando could protest. Flustered, he stammered about budgets, but Edward only laughed, claiming justice had finally caught up to their lazy captain. Not far away, Uno stood observing a nervous group of men. At their feet lay the bodies of adventurers, limbs twisted, blood soaking the dirt. Though their language was foreign to him, their expressions were unmistakable. Terror. They were bandits, and they had just realized who they were facing. Unos had stumbled upon a merchant caravan mid-attack. The loud ones, he guessed, were the robbers. The quiet ones, the corpses, had been guards and drivers. Then he spotted her, a fallen female adventurer, small and fragile. Her body wore light armor with a few patched sections. She must have been young, perhaps still learning. Something in her stillness stirred a flicker of sympathy in Unis's heart. He silently hoped her suffering was over, but his reflection was cut short as something whistled through the air. An arrow. It bounced harmlessly off his skin. The bandits looked stunned, realizing their blades and arrows couldn't pierce him. They charged anyway, yelling like fools instead of retreating. Unos almost pitied their ignorance. Who led men like these? Goblins. There was no longer any doubt. They were thieves. Unos moved before they could blink. His arm flashed like lightning. One head burst apart beneath the blow. The others shrieked and scattered, but too late. The monster inside Unos awakened fully. His arm speared another man through the chest, and blood sprayed like rain. Without pause, he turned and kicked the next one. The sheer force split the man in two. The last survivor collapsed, trembling violently, tears streaming down his face. He whimpered incoherently as Unos' shadow loomed over him, heavy and inescapable. like the hand of judgment itself. Unos recalled something his old instructor once said, a brutal lesson about the usefulness of fear, that true dominance came not only from strength but from planting terror deep in others' hearts. He gave a slow nod, as if remembering the ghost of that voice. Then he ended the final bandit's trembling life with a single swift kick that shattered the man's skull like glass. Yet strangely, that teacher had never been real, just an actress on an old borrowed DVD he once found. When the blood stopped dripping, the quiet returned and Unos finally stared around at the carnage. He'd overstepped again. Yes, they were bandits, but still human. His face, however, remained blank emotion tucked away behind cold eyes. After all, bandits attacked the innocent. In the lands of Canaan, men like these would have been executed anyway. In a twisted way, perhaps he had done them a favor. Still, part of him couldn't help but anticipate some kind of reward. His gaze fell on the merchant caravan nearby. Maybe he'd find valuables, or something simpler. Salt, perhaps. Peering inside, he expected loot. Instead, a startled chorus erupted. A handful of survivors still hid among the wagons. They screamed at the sight of him, a towering figure beside the river, blood still staining his hands. Yet Unos simply smiled, eyes glinting in quiet satisfaction. Because at last, he had found it. 2 containers. Salt. After surviving so long on nothing but tasteless dried meat, this simple treasure meant the world. He could finally season his meals again. Besides that discovery, the remaining goods were unimpressive. Just some coarse wool for insulation, and an ornate jug, beautifully carved with delicate patterns. Unos turned it over curiously. It looked valuable, perhaps magical, but no spark of power stirred within it, just a hole at the bottom, probably once part of a fountain. With mild disappointment, he sighed. Useless. It would serve no purpose now. Tossing the jug aside, he sat down to plan his next move. He decided to return to the marketplace to find sturdier jars. Even with wool padding, the current ones could easily crack. He'd been traveling back and forth between the Empire, Canaan, and Einhell for months. If he kept repeating the same route, it made sense to establish a proper base. It wasn't just practical, it was clever. A home base meant security, storage, and long-term planning. Deep down, the idea sparked something childish in him. The thought of building a hidden fortress, a secret hideout, filled him with an unexpected thrill. He chose the borderlands near Einhell and Canaan for the location. Perhaps the old town of Idris or the woods close by. His excitement soared as he envisioned it. That night, he could barely rest, eager for morning's first light. When dawn came, he set off, clutching his jars of salt like precious jewels. As Idris came into view, he noticed a faint shimmer of color peeking through the trees, unnatural hues that didn't belong. Curiosity tugged at him. Maybe an ancient artifact? With branches blocking his vision, he crept forward for a better look. Using his enhanced sight, he cautiously scanned the surroundings again. Then he froze. Cold dread prickled across his neck. What he was seeing, it couldn't be ignored. He knew exactly what this was, and his instincts whispered that he couldn't run from it this time. Before him loomed a massive structure. Familiar, almost identical to the facility where he had once awakened, the birthplace of his nightmare. Now fate had led him back to his doorstep. He couldn't pretend it didn't exist, not anymore. He steeled his resolve and stepped closer, ready to uncover the truth buried within. Meanwhile, far away, beyond the Empire's remnants, the fortress city of Carnish stirred under Canaan's banner. Diara sighed deeply as her orders came through. They were to storm a goblin fortress. The absurdity of it weighed on her. Carnish had once belonged to Canaan, then to the Empire. Its walls remembered countless battles. This was no ordinary mission. As she glanced at the weathered parapets, painful memories flooded back her fallen comrades. Everyone except Lena had died here once. The memories still haunted her. The only reason she accepted this mission was the pay generous enough to silence her reluctance. Deep down, she blamed Unas for everything. When he vanished into Canaan, her fortune had dried up too. The moment he crossed that border, so did her luck. As she brooded, a soldier nearby laughed crudely, calling out a filthy proposition. Diara's patience cracked. How predictable men like him were everywhere. Instead of replying, she simply pointed toward the enemy fortress. "If you're looking for company," she said coolly, "the Goblin Queen's waiting." The man's smirk died instantly, confusion replacing arrogance. Another mercenary watching the exchange muttered in awe. No one dared mock a mage from Kinoshita. His surprise doubled when he learned she hailed from Syria as well. Those two clans, Kinoshita and Su, were legendary across Caesarea, their bloodlines renowned for magical prowess. To bear such a name was proof of exceptional strength. The first man realized just how lucky he was she hadn't turned him to ash on the spot. The second muttered that he understood completely. It was hard, after all, to ignore her power or her beauty. Against all odds, that tension between them eased into laughter. And somehow, from that absurd moment, the two soldiers became unlikely friends. The next morning, battle erupted. The man who'd once insulted Diara met his end early in the chaos. As fireballs rained down from the skies, Diara unleashed a massive burst of flame that consumed an entire battalion of goblins in one strike. Her magic outshone everyone's, her explosion so fierce it carved a crater through their ranks. Over 100 foes fell that day to her alone. None were surprised. Those from Kinoshita were said to be forces of nature, yet the name Kinoshita chilled her veins. It dragged old memories of her former master to the surface, a man she despised more than any monster. Drained after the fight, she announced she was out of mana and needed to rest. Orlando, nearby, approached with admiration and gratitude, offering a genuine smile. But peace never lingered long. Shouting filled the air knights, berating mercenaries for sloppy formations. Orlando muttered that running out of magic was natural after such a battle, but the knight commander wouldn't stop complaining about unreliable sellswords. Diara's fists clenched. She remembered the briefing. These knights were ordered to oversee the mercenaries. One of the main reasons she had hesitated to take the job. The attack could have ended quickly if they'd just leveled the fortress entirely, but the nobles wanted to preserve it for future use. Typical. Nobles always far from danger, yet the loudest when giving orders. He watched as the knights retreated for repositioning, leaving mercenaries to hold the line. Seeing the goblins weaken, she silently prayed none still possessed weapons left from the Empire's ruins. Once the walls finally fell, everything changed fast. A flood of reinforcements poured in. Only the Goblin Queen and a few survivors remained. Orlando charged forward, his sword flashing. The Queen's legs snapped under his blow, rendering her motionless. A volley of arrows ended her life soon after. The victory was swift and decisive. 5 dead, 65 injured, and a fortress mostly intact. The knight commander smirked, claiming their success would earn him the Lord's praise. Diara's blood boiled at the arrogance. He had been nothing but a hindrance. Then Orlando called out, praising her performance. Assuming he was like every other man she'd met, Diara turned away. But his tone stayed respectful. He wasn't leering, he was acknowledging her strength. Cautiously, she asked what he meant. He introduced himself as Orlando, leader of the Daybreak Battalion. His comrade, Lloyd, greeted her as well. They wanted her on their team. Orlando explained there was talk of a new breed of monster one he had faced before. His team would soon be ordered to hunt it down, but they were undermanned, especially lacking mages of her caliber. Diara's guarded expression softened slightly. She leaned in, demanding to hear more. Meanwhile, far away, Unas reached the open gates of the structure he had found earlier. The interior was charred, dotted with scorch marks so deep they had melted the steel walls. The elevator shaft gaped in silence, its gears long frozen, cables severed. Still, something faint shimmered in the corner of his vision. Threads, fine silken traces stretched along the floor. Realization hit him. This was where the spider being had been born, the cradle of that creature's existence. He descended deeper, step by cautious step. Beyond, another door hung ajar, creaking faintly. Then came a soft hum, barely audible, yet alive. Power. Against all odds, one of the generators was still running. Unos blinked in disbelief. So that was it. The gate only opened for those leaving, not entering. He inspected the machines closely. They were Hydra model generators driven by underground groundwater pressure. Their design was pure Imperial craftsmanship. Most were broken, but one still worked, its systems flickering weakly. The data display indicated it had only 300 days of operable life left. He couldn't fix it now, but he made a mental note to extend its lifespan later. The place was secure, underground, and nearly indestructible. Even better, it still had electricity. This would become his fortress, his empire reborn beneath the earth. Without hesitation, he unloaded his supplies, stacking everything into a small storage chamber. His next objective was clear travel to Alquell and gather additional resources. Before that, though, he returned to Einhell to recharge and rest among the oblivious elves. As usual, the elven children were in the middle of mischief during their bath time. Their latest prank involved distracting an older elf woman with a fish, while one of them snuck behind her to tug playfully at her clothing. The poor woman gasped, slipping gently into the water as the kids laughed uncontrollably. Her clothes splashed away downstream while laughter echoed through the forest. "Give them back, you little devils," she yelled, half scolding, half laughing. Unos couldn't help but chuckle quietly, especially when he recognized her. Number 6, the gentle teacher. He found himself oddly looking forward to what kind of chaos the kids would cause next. Watching these elves live so freely reminded him that they weren't so different from humans after all. For someone from the Empire, the realization left him conflicted, but also strangely hopeful. Building a relationship with them might be the key to understanding the past. After all, elves lived for centuries. If anyone could reveal what truly happened 200 years ago, it was them. The only obstacle left was their language, and that, he decided, could be learned in time. For now, he simply enjoyed the peaceful scenery, content to just breathe and exist without conflict. Meanwhile, in Canaan's capital, another story was unfolding. Argyle sat in his office, drowning in paperwork, fatigue etched into his face. A knock at his door interrupted the monotony. "Enter," he called. Marcus, the seasoned leader of the Golden Amber mercenary group, stepped inside, immediately sensing Argyle's foul mood. Argyle informed him of a new royal directive: eliminate an unusual creature species, working alongside the military. Marcus wasn't surprised, he had expected it. Rumors had spread about a monster attacking merchant caravans, not the merchants themselves, but specifically bandits traveling with them. The kingdom's sudden choice to obliterate the species entirely felt hasty, but Argyle suspected arrogance was behind it. The creature, it seemed, had interfered with the Southern Reconstruction Project, where a new city and a new source of freshwater were being developed. Argyle couldn't wrap his mind around why they had to risk their lives fighting an unknown creature for such a vague reason. The lack of information felt like a cruel joke. To him, it was as if the kingdom didn't care whether mercenaries lived or died. If the mission succeeded, the army would claim the glory. If it failed, the mercenaries would be the scapegoats. The injustice burned in his chest, twisting his sense of loyalty into anger and disbelief at how broken their nation had become. Marcus noticed Argyle's frustration and gently told him not to carry the weight alone. Arnali, he reminded, had given his all, and no one could blame him for that. Marcus then revealed that his team, Gold and Amber, would not take part in this senseless mission. He could face death himself without hesitation, but he refused to drag the younger ones into the jaws of danger. Arnali nodded, admitting he'd make the same choice, and wished others would find the courage to hold back as well. But Marcus knew Daybreak Battlefield couldn't withdraw. They were the only team to have ever confronted that creature before. Fate had already chosen them. If Orlando from Daybreak joined the battle, Grant from the rival team Movable would surely follow. Their rivalry ran too deep for him to stay behind and watch. Marcus felt a fleeting calm at the thought. Grant might be reckless, but his talent was undeniable. With a soft, weary chuckle, Marcus noted how people became cautious as they aged, a quiet truth that stung more than he expected. He joked half-heartedly about naming the creature Whispers of the Earth. Even without seeing it, he sensed it belonged to a realm beyond human reach, a place no mortal should trespass upon. The very thought of confronting it sent a chill down his spine, and then, as the shadows thinned into morning light, Uno stirred at the familiar voice of Elf Number 6 calling his name. She was summoning him early, her tone calm yet urgent as she watched over something precious. It was Unos's baby, safe and sound while he napped. For a fleeting instant, warmth filled his heart. The sight of his partner beside their child gave him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in ages. But the moment shattered. It wasn't real, just a dream, gone as soon as he opened his eyes. Awakening fully, he looked down at his body, only to find that the emptiness between his legs still remained, a painful reminder of what he had lost. He wasn't surprised. The day before, he had sprinted toward Airquill, pushing his body past its limits. Exhaustion had won, and he fell asleep instantly, too drained to think or eat. Never before had he felt such bone-deep fatigue. When dawn arrived, he decided to wander the building, taking his time exploring its silent, dust-covered rooms. He found ordinary household items scattered about, echoes of lives long gone. To his astonishment, some electrical appliances still worked, humming faintly like relics of a forgotten era. Among them stood a massive TV in pristine condition. Unos, who had always loved watching films on big screens, couldn't help but grin. He wondered if any of the data discs had survived intact after all this time. His exploration led him to an old video camera. The possibilities flooded his mind. Memories, moments, a chance to record and preserve what little beauty remained in this hollow world. Old, but unease crept in. He remembered that filming others without consent was a crime, even back when civilization stood tall. Then came another thought. Did laws still matter now? Still, somewhere in the depths of his fading humanity, a faint moral voice whispered, power misused was evil, no matter the era. Unos understood that even in ruin, there were lines he shouldn't cross. Yet ever since he stopped seeing himself as human, those same lines had begun to blur into insignificance. Turning to the elves, he promised them that the Empire's wonders, their technology, would shine again, captured in breathtaking clarity. As he browsed the catalog, he found a newer model equipped with a zoom lens and advanced features. He searched the shelves and even the dusty storage rooms, only to discover that the exact model was missing. Left with no choice, he settled for another version instead. His next destination was Java, famed for its stockpile of old electronics. That was where hope might still flicker. The distance didn't faze him. He was ready to run however far it took to find what he wanted. He carried the TV and DVD player with him, driven by restless curiosity. Once he reached his base, he hurried to set up everything, his mind ablaze with anticipation. Along the way, he ignored the goblins roaming the streets. Soon, Jisva emerged on the horizon, eerily silent. He scanned the desolate area, hoping his journey wouldn't be in vain. Then his gaze locked on a massive orc's corpse hanging from a traffic light. A haunting warning, a clear message to stay away. Before he could react, something lunged at him from behind. Instinct kicked in. Unos parried effortlessly. The assailant stepped back, and under the light, its form clarified. A crimson ogre, fiercer and more cunning than any he'd ever faced. Its presence radiated danger, its intelligence a cruel twist of fate. The thought struck him. If this monster appeared while he was still searching for the camera, it could spell real disaster. With resolve burning in his eyes, he decided to fight strategically, taunting the ogre to enrage and expose itself. Roaring, it charged. Unos clenched his fists and braced. He blocked the blow, yet the sheer force flung him backward. Never before had he faced raw strength like this. Strangely, fear never came, only exhilaration. At last, an equal, a true test of his limits. Unos tried to counter, but the ogre struck with a brutal uppercut. His vision blurred for a second, the world spinning. The beast seized its moment, hammering him with relentless fury. It aimed a swift kick to finish the fight, but Unos caught the massive leg mid-air, halting it effortlessly. This was no longer a game, only one of them would leave alive. With cold precision, he crushed its leg, hoping, absurdly, that the creature wouldn't die holding hatred. He followed with a solid punch, the sound echoing through the empty street. Then came a blinding flurry of sharp, rapid jabs. Each strike landed while he kept the beast's shattered leg pinned beneath him. Blood gushed out in torrents. The ogre wheezed and coughed crimson. Unos released his hold at last, watching the creature collapse helplessly. It whimpered for mercy, but compassion was beyond him now. He crushed its skull beneath his heel, and silence reclaimed the air. To him, the ogre earned its fate. No excuse could change that truth. His wounds closed quickly, his body adapting beyond reason. In that moment, Unos believed, knew he was the strongest being to walk the earth. The future felt oddly peaceful. No fears, no burdens. Now, only one mission remained. Find the perfect camera. Inside a dim electronic shop, his eyes immediately found the prize, a video camera gleaming as if waiting for him. He spun around with pure joy, clutching it like a long-lost dream finally retrieved. Just to be safe, he bought 2 identical cameras and 50 blank discs. With this, his filming setup was complete. Then, curiosity tugged at him. The store's movie section beckoned. He wandered down the aisles, scanning movie after movie until one section drew his gaze. A curtain corner marked 18 and olders. Unos said nothing. Quietly, he slipped inside. It felt almost magnetic, as though something unseen was pulling him forward. Hesitation. When he emerged again, his basket contained 2 cameras, 50 blank discs, 3 standard films, and a hefty pile of adult movies with subtitles. Later, he'd insist that curiosity alone drove him, that his once favorite gravure idol had moved into that line of work, and that he only wanted to confirm the discs still played properly. Genres, he said, were meaningless now. He longed to start watching right away, but forced himself to wait. He wanted to savor the details, every expression, every movement, but first things first, dinner time. Once the meat sizzled to perfection over the flames, Unos sprinkled cane and salt delicately atop the juicy cuts. He arranged the meal carefully on plates he had hand-picked earlier, crafting his trademark dish, Unos-style deer steak. It was simple grilled meat, yet when he took a bite, he smiled sincerely. The salt made it richer, tastier. Maybe next time, he mused, he'd add spices to mask the wild scent. After finishing his meal, he washed the dishes with tidy precision. If anyone had been watching, they would have noticed the place still had power and running water, luxuries that deeply impressed him. After years of fetching from rivers, water from a tap felt divine. Finally, the long-awaited moment came. Unos sat before the TV, the player humming softly beneath it. Everything was ready. His heart raced with expectation. His hands trembled as he slid the first disc out of its case. The cover showed a woman with an alluring gaze and generous curves. He inserted it gently, hoping, praying it would play. But the screen filled only with white noise, static. He had half expected this. After 2 centuries, nothing was certain. Still, he refused to give up. He tried another disc, one featuring his favorite model, but again, nothing but static haze. He even tested foreign titles with glossy covers and bright smiles. The result didn't change. Failure after failure, and realization dawned. The problem ran deeper. The video cameras themselves were malfunctioning. Yet strangely, one of them whirred to life, recording on its own. Desperate, Unos snatched the freshly recorded disc and shoved it into the player. Again, only static, no image, no sound. His scream tore through the room, raw and anguished, louder than the Crimson Ogre's battle roar. The dream he fought so hard for shattered. The thought that these discs had survived 200 years only to fail broke him. The Empire's technology, once unmatched, could not even preserve something so simple. Maybe it wasn't the discs, he realized. Maybe the fault lay in the player itself. He considered rushing back to Airquill at once, but then his eyes landed on a single disc cover, one featuring a blonde woman with radiant eyes and a voluptuous body. An idea flashed through his mind, igniting new resolve. With fresh determination, Unos decided to test a different disc player, soon. Maybe one day, he thought, he could finally record and watch those forbidden films with his own eyes. The mere idea sparked a fragile but precious thread of hope deep within him. He realized that without that glimmer, that absurd little dream, his mind might crumble entirely. Hope was the only thing anchoring him to sanity. For now, he decided to rest, to let the world fade for a while. Someday, when his resolve had hardened again, when he could face even despair without flinching, he would venture out to find a new disc player, no matter how far or how long it took. That night, Unos drifted into a soft, tranquil dream. In it, elves number 6 and number 8 laughed under the sunlight, dressed in small bikinis as they played along a radiant, endless shore. The waves shimmered like laughter itself. Though it seemed pure and happy, an undertone of melancholy lingered. Unos had endured countless hardships, yet he knew he couldn't live buried in gloom forever. He wanted to rebuild, to keep moving. So he headed toward the Canaan Highway, intent on collecting free salts, a simple act but symbolic of renewal. When he arrived, he noticed 3 abandoned wagons, their wheels sunk into the ground. The signs were clear. People had been nearby recently. Seeing their struggle, he knew he must act. This time, though, he didn't bother with camouflage. Let them see him, let them know. Suddenly, a few men bolted away with one working wagon, the wheels grinding furiously against the dirt. Their hasty retreat caught Unos off guard. It felt strangely exhilarating, almost alive somehow. Couldn't fully explain the sensation, but something about their movements felt genuine, human. Curious, he checked the remaining wagons for supplies. One bag contained dried meat with an odd scent, artificial, chemical. Instantly, his instinct screamed, a trap. His suspicion was confirmed as troops from both the Canaan and Kingdom forces arrived, their banners glinting under the harsh sun, with rows of hired soldiers at their side. Roughly 500 men, a small army. He had expected retaliation eventually, but not this soon. The realization forced him to decide quickly. Running would only postpone the inevitable. Escaping would solve nothing. He still had choices to make. Should he wait cautiously, biding his time, or strike now, erase as many foes as possible before they closed in? Either way, he knew the nobles of Canaan would rage at the outcome. Traveling there would become nearly impossible. Roads would empty, fear replacing commerce. He would be hunted. Unos took a deep breath, steadying his thoughts. The local commander let out a cruel laugh, mocking him for falling into their trap, promising he'd regret ever turning against them. Rage flared. Unos rose from where he stood, eyes blazing. He'd sort out his emotions later. For now, he would answer their arrogance with his fists. The archers hesitated, nerves betraying them, but their commander barked an order. They released their arrows anyway. The shafts struck and bounced off harmlessly, clattering to the ground, their faces drained of color. Unos smirked. This was the cue for their real weapon to appear. Sure enough, a rider emerged, tall, armored, gripping a halberd that gleamed darkly. Unos tightened his stance, anticipating a worthy duel. The horseman charged forward, reckless and fearless. Unos quickly grasped his opponent's rhythm, a strike, retreat, then spell, a deadly dance of precision. Before the rider could pull back, Unos seized the halberd's shaft with unyielding strength. To his surprise, the rider instantly dropped the weapon and leapt off his horse, abandoning both tools of advantage. Unos blinked, momentarily thrown off. A rain of fireballs suddenly fell from the sky, erupting around him. The knights cheered wildly, believing victory was at hand. But when the smoke cleared, Unos stood untouched. The inferno hadn't even singed him. Their mages, he realized, were barely competent. He prepared to retaliate, but noticed the halberd had mysteriously vanished from his grasp. The rider had recalled it, magically. The weapon soared through the air, twisting in mid-flight before slicing toward Unos's face. This time, the blade connected, cutting flesh. Shock flickered across Unos's expression. That weapon was enchanted, loyal to its master's call. Intriguing, he thought, wiping away the blood. He readied himself once more, finally deciding to fight in earnest. The rider grinned, eyes blazing with thrill. Unos saw it in him, that fever for battle that many mercenaries shared, and as their leader fought, the others surged forward, hungry for blood. But Unos had grown weary of meaningless skirmishes. He wanted to end this conflict. He lunged and swung the punch so fast it tore the air, but the rider narrowly flipped backward, dodging cleanly. A flicker of admiration crossed Unos's mind. His foe wasn't entirely incompetent. Still, escape was not an option. Not today. As the rider braced for another clash, Unos struck again with punishing force. The blow sent the man crashing into the ground, spitting blood through gritted teeth. Unos scanned the battlefield, eyes sharp. Who would dare step up next? The knight commander cursed and rallied his remaining men, calling the mercenaries pathetic and ordering the archers and mages to surround and finish Unos off. At last, Unos felt it, the heartbeat of a true war. Then came a familiar voice cutting through the chaos. Orlando. He appeared with his company, greeting Unos with a cool smirk and a casual, "It's been a while." The sight made Unos's body tremble. The scars from their previous battle still burned within him, reminders of both pain and humiliation. Fury exploded, and he charged at Orlando without restraint. But Orlando slipped through each attack like smoke, graceful, untouchable. Unos realized with a pang of surprise that his old rival had evolved. Orlando was no longer blocking. He flowed, evading, reading movements before they came. For a heartbeat, admiration flickered beneath Unos's rage. But he swore silently. This time, he would land a blow, just as he moved to strike. A fireball tore through the air and slammed into his side. It didn't hurt, but it stunned him, locking his body mid-step. Orlando seized the opening, but hesitated when Unos tilted his head in that unsettling, almost inhuman way. The movement startled Unos himself. He'd underestimated the mages. For once, he had let his guard drop. Behind those mages stood a towering figure, a hidden threat. Orlando kept pressing the attack, trying to pull Unos's focus away. More sword wielders joined the battle, swarming like ants. Unos' irritation spiked. It was getting nearly impossible to counter the mages and fend off endless blades at once. Then the knight commander ordered the archers to prepare their volley. Panic spread. The hired mercenaries broke rank and fled. Unos could only scoff at their cowardice. From his vantage, he saw it clearly. Mages, knights, mercenaries, all fighting separately. No unity at all. Amid the flying arrows and screams, someone sprinted through the chaos. The blonde, the fifth beauty he had encountered before, her wild hair gleamed under the firelight. She should have known better. Enchanted blades couldn't hurt him, yet she smiled boldly and tossed something small and glinting his way. Unos dodged instantly, suspecting poison. Then, a massive fireball erupted toward him. Instinctively, he smacked it to the ground, the flames exploding harmlessly at his feet. Everyone froze, stunned, even the mage who had cast the spell. Unos stood silent, collecting himself amid the sudden hush. The soldiers began whispering frantically. How could one being repel magic like that? They started to doubt everything, even their own survival. A shiver ran down Unos' spine. The potency of that magic, it could have truly hurt him. He was sure it belonged to the same powerful mage who had ambushed him earlier. And for the first time since gaining his new body, true exhilaration took hold. His lips curved into a wolfish grin. Planting his feet firmly, he glared down the knights, daring them to come. If they wanted a fight, he would grant it, with all his strength unleashed. The glint in his eyes sent tremors through their hearts. In an instant, discipline crumbled. Soldiers scattered in all directions, fleeing for their lives. A pang of disappointment struck Unos. He had longed for a real battle, and yet they ran. A roar erupted from his chest, shaking the earth. Some knights dropped their weapons in terror, crying out for their mothers. The commander's desperate orders went ignored. To Unos, this army was finished. Empty bravado and hollow pride. Few bold knights tried to resist. Their leader lunged, only to be slammed down by a single blow. Unos told them flatly to stop pretending to be knights. It was over. The rest turned and ran. No one looked back. Thus fell the Canaan army, annihilated by a single man. Only the mercenaries remained, their faces pale behind the fading smoke. They retreated into the mage's circle, believing safety lay there. Unos advanced toward them like a storm given form. Orlando raised his sword and told his men he'd take point himself. Fireballs streaked through the air, yet Unos didn't flinch. He kept walking. Orlando met him head-on, swinging his massive sword with deadly force. Unos sidestepped, countering with a heavy punch that cracked the air, but Orlando, astonishingly, deflected the blow with his blade, the clash ringing out like thunder between gods. The surrounding mercenaries scrambled to surround Unos, hoping to overwhelm him through sheer numbers, but he sensed their movement immediately, every shift in the air betraying their intent. In an instant he cut through them, one strike, one fall, dismantling their ranks with terrifying ease. Even Orlando, once the proud rival who'd stood against him, fell to the ground as his allies collapsed around him. Unos stood amid the silence, chest heaving slightly, wondering, was it truly over? He hadn't even gone all out. He'd held back deliberately, believing that many would survive if he restrained himself. The few who perished, they were simply unlucky. Just as complacency began to creep in, a massive crystal hurtled toward him out of nowhere. Its impact erupted with a thunderous boom that echoed across the field, shaking the air itself. A female mage, pale and trembling, gasped for breath after releasing such an overwhelming spell. Unos caught the crystal just in time, shattering it in his grasp before it could reach him. Had it struck him directly, it might have caused real harm, perhaps more than he cared to admit. Shock flickered behind his eyes. He hadn't expected anyone to still have strength left for an attack of this scale. His gaze turned slowly toward the group of mages. Among them, one figure stood out, glowing faintly under the dissipating smoke. Her invisibility spell had faltered, revealing her exhausted, trembling form. Unos took a step forward, intent on seeing her face clearly. Orlando could only watch from afar as Unos approached her. Diara! Unos reached out, removing her pointed hat. She reacted instantly, slicing toward his neck. But he caught her hand mid-strike, his grip unyielding. To his surprise, she still struggled fiercely, thrashing, refusing to surrender even now. Her chest rose and fell rapidly with every gasp. For a fleeting second, his focus slipped. Her voice blurred into nothing more than a faint vibration in his ears. He nudged her slightly, and her trembling body made his attention drift for just an instant longer. Something about her struck a chord of memory. As he studied her face more carefully, realization washed over him. Those curves, that aura, it was her, the same wizard from long ago, Diara. Recognition sharpened his gaze as Diara stared back, her eyes blazing with fury and disgust. Meanwhile, far away in a quiet chapel in Caesarea, Lena prayed fervently. A dreadful unease festered within her, cold and unshakable. She prayed for her brother and Gista, begging that they would protect Diara from harm. But fate had already spoken. At that very moment, Unos held Diarra like a lifeless doll in his monstrous grip. She struggled and screamed, but he couldn't remember her face clearly. Only when her voice, that familiar Caesarean tone, reached his ears did certainty strike him. She was the one, his first chosen. He thought perhaps she had remained with him this long because she sought something from him. Yet even now, he believed their debt settled. He had used the potion she'd gifted him, one that had saved his life. That, in his mind, made things even. The world felt distant, almost indifferent under the darkening sky. With calm resolve, Unos carried Diarra deep into the forest. The knights, relieved to see the creature withdraw, stepped back immediately. Their relief turned to careless chatter, all this chaos over one woman. They dismissed the mercenaries as useless and left them to clean up the mess. Orlando didn't move. Words failed him. Diarra continued to shout, her defiance breaking into fear. She thought Unos would either devour her or violate her. Terrified, she screamed for him to kill her instead. She swore she would never yield, never beg, but she froze when Unos, without warning, gently set her down. Her instincts screamed to attack. She considered striking while his attention faltered as he rummaged through his bag. But what came next shattered all her expectations. Unos knelt quietly before her. In his massive hands, he held out a sword, her sword. He released a deep, soft hum. Not a threat, but something oddly gentle, almost soothing. Stunned, Diarra snatched the sword instinctively. Her arms quivered as she hugged it close, clutching it to her heart as if grounding herself in that touch of steel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Unos rose slowly and turned away. He left her there in silence. Watching his broad back fade into the trees, Diarra's heart twisted with emotions she couldn't name. Her voice erupted suddenly, raw and trembling, accusing him that humans were not his toys. That night, Unos sat before a faint campfire, the flames flickering against the lonely wind. His mind wandered, not to her face but to the image of her bare chest, unhidden and defiant even in defeat. There was something about her steadfastness that left him uneasy and oddly respectful. Could she possibly feel anything similar? Deep inside, he finally admitted the truth. People could never accept someone like him. He knew that because he had been one of them once. To him, the battle was just a heavy workout, not even a real struggle. His power had grown too monstrous for humans to endure. And yet, buried beneath it all, a flicker of yearning remained, the hope of one day living among them again. Even as a creature of fear, he wondered if such peace was still possible. The thought pulled his heart in strange directions. He massaged his temples, calming his racing mind, then decided to eat. He knew the aftermath of this fight would raise his threat level across Canaan. Walls would tighten, trade routes would freeze, the kingdom would adapt. For a while, he had to disappear. Yet information in these lands spread slowly, and perhaps within that confusion, he could seize opportunity. Anticipation tingled through him as he lay down, whispering to the morning to come faster. Tomorrow promised money, risk, maybe both. Sleep came at last. Meanwhile, Diarra clutched her friend's sword tightly against her chest. Lloyd ordered the wounded to be loaded onto wagons while the others remained on alert. The fifth beauty approached Orlando as he leaned, injured, against a tree. "I'll live," he muttered, forcing a grin. Lloyd noted that the casualties were lighter than expected. He thought their result was commendable. Orlando let out a tired chuckle. He sighed, calling Lloyd naive. Couldn't he see what had really happened? His tone shifted, grave and cold. "We were toys," he said. "That thing was playing with us." Out of 557 soldiers, 456 were wounded, 18 confirmed dead, a grotesque ratio proving their enemy hadn't even tried to kill them. Still, the local knights claimed victory, and the Lord happily supported that fantasy. Just as Argyle had feared, the mercenary guild took the blame. The Lord then decreed that Dawn's battlefield would face punishment for allegedly withholding information during their previous encounter with the creature, a crime considered unforgivable. Argyle's fury erupted. His fist slammed into the table. He had warned them, told them the monster carried a magical blade and superior intellect. He'd given every detail he could. Since the Great Empire War, true battles had vanished, leaving the guild's power eroded, chained by royal oversight. Now he had no voice strong enough to defend the mercenaries. He pitied Orlando deeply. Another group would vanish soon, swallowed like the rest. In the Canaan Kingdom's bustling city of Lecter, Diarra walked the streets, lost in thought about that terrifying new creature. The more she pondered, the deeper her confusion grew. What was that being? Canaan had studied monsters for centuries, their forms, habits, powers. She prided herself on knowledge, yet this one broke every pattern. It remembered faces, voices. Was it truly sentient, or something beyond monsters, beyond men? Her colleague said Orlando's attack had made an impression. Still, she wondered, why had it taken their magical sword? What had it seen in her? Then, her thoughts landed on the strange fruit she carried. Could it be connected? She turned it in her palms, the smooth skin glinting. Was this what the creature had truly wanted all along? Her musings were interrupted when Orlando and Edward approached. She told them sharply that her task was done. They couldn't stop her. Orlando apologized, saying gently that he couldn't let her return home like this anymore. Somewhere far away, unseen eyes like those of a reptile gleamed through the dark, watching. Lena whispered more prayers for Diarra. But at that same moment, Diarra struck Edward squarely across the face, demanding he repeat what he'd just said. Edward wiped the blood calmly from his nose, then revealed their punishment. They were assigned to hunt down a giant viper. That was their penalty, handed by command of Dawn's battlefield. Tiara's heart clenched. This meant no escape. Withdrawal equaled treason. Even as she longed to return home, it was now impossible. She pressed for details, calling the mission suicidal. That creature, she insisted, was a walking calamity. Even at full strength, they hadn't stood a chance. The knights were at fault, yet they'd thrown the mercenaries under the cart. Her outrage trembled in her voice. Were they really just going to accept that? Orlando rubbed his forehead, weary. He muttered an apology. Then, clenching his fist, he explained bitterly how Canaan treated its soldiers, and warned her trying to flee would bring endless pursuit. Better to face the monster than die hunted like prey. He needed her help to end this. Tiara's anger softened into reluctant resolve. She knew she had no choice, and she couldn't stop worrying about Lena, still left behind. Elsewhere, Uno savored roasted meat under starlight, relishing the flavor. Rich, smoky, and sharp. The black pepper he'd taken from Canaan masked the gamey odor perfectly. Grinding it with his oversized hands was awkward, yet rewarding. The effort paid off. For 3 straight days, he feasted on deliciously seasoned meat, but soon, even the finest flavor dulled. He began craving vegetables, crisp, fresh, alive. When he'd been human, he'd thought meat alone sufficed, yet now his monstrous body yearned for more. Maybe, he mused, it was crying for nutrients, maybe even fruit. He still had some sugar left, a good base for preserving. He thought about finding fruits or vegetables, though fighting elves for food seemed foolish. Their southern fields were off limits. He hated that region anyway. That meant only one choice, return to Canaan, quietly. He could blend in near a farming village, unseen. Outlaws often hid there. People wouldn't notice one more shadow. He'd memorized multiple sites from the maps he'd found and planned to loot one again before heading northeast toward Imreed. For now, he decided to rest at his old lookout near Unosarai at the familiar cliff and settled himself down. Eyes fixed on the river, hoping he'd glimpse someone, anyone, below. Hours slipped by, and the banks remained empty. He paced slowly, whispering that a true Imperial soldier shouldn't grow impatient. One night passed. Another dawn came. Still no elves returning to bathe. Hope faded, but he remained there, waiting through the following day. Yet again, no one appeared. Something wasn't right. Maybe the elves had spotted him and changed their habits, but that didn't fit. They were predictable, proud. For them to vanish meant something worse. A gnawing unease built inside him. Perhaps the Einhir had moved them. For now, his watch duty felt suspended, so he told himself. Soon he would return to gather vegetables from Canaan. He smiled faintly at the thought of fresh food, or at least he tried to convince himself. Fatigue dragged him down. His limbs ached, each step slower than before. The first target village lay empty, silent, ghost-like. He was right about its desolation. As night fell, he camped quietly, planning to try another the next day. But that place too was deserted. Una steadied his breath. There were still other sites nearby. He couldn't stop here. He recalled the northern routes and considered the settlements beyond. He also weighed the southeast, frustrated that he couldn't jot anything down. These massive claws, useful in battle but useless for riding, he'd have to adapt. For now, he chose the southern path. When he finally reached another settlement, it stood strangely intact, yet empty. There were faint signs of life, but no people, ruined walls, smashed roofs. Not from war, but from something huge tearing through. The patterns echoed the first village. No weapons, no blood, no scent of rot. They weren't wiped out by humans, but by something that devoured everything whole. A shadow viper, perhaps. The serpent said to mimic forms. If one lurked nearby, he was ready, confident. Then he spotted green, vegetables sprouting among the ruins. His tail swayed faintly, but they weren't ready to harvest, and the storage barns had already been raided by vermin. Disappointment sank in. Another dead end. He turned northward, crossing the icy ridges with silent resolve. But soon, faint footsteps broke the wind's calm. Instinct sharpened. 20, maybe more. Survivors? Bandits? He strained to see through the clustered trees even with his zooming eyes, but the forest kept its secrets for now. Unis crept forward, deciding to close the distance so he could see the source of the voices more clearly. But then his foot slipped, and he tumbled down a steep slope, landing hard on the dirt below. Embarrassment flushed through him. Getting back on his feet, he let out a dry chuckle, muttering to himself about how his own luck, and apparently his charm, had completely abandoned him today. As he dusted off the dirt, he froze. Familiar figures stood at the base of the slope, Orlando and his group of mercenaries. The shock hit him like a cold wind. What were they doing way out here in the mountains? For a moment, he wondered if fate was mocking him. He had mistaken them for villagers earlier, and he hadn't even bothered to disguise himself this time. Orlando readied his weapon immediately, his frustration boiling over. Terrible timing, Onos, he muttered under his breath. Meanwhile, Beauty number 5 whispered her suspicion that the creature might have been drawn to her scent, still carrying traces of Orlando. Edward and the others exchanged uneasy glances but nodded in agreement. Orlando sighed, taking full responsibility for their situation. Uno studied them all closely. They were alert, on guard, yet not eager to fight. He judged that a full confrontation would be more trouble than it was worth. If they planned to flee, he would have gladly let them. But before anyone could move, a firm voice cut through the tension. Wait, it was Diara. She stepped forward with purpose, confidence steadying her stride. Uno's gaze flickered instinctively to her chest. Recognition jolted through him. She was the one, the mage with the enchanted sword. Then, to his utter astonishment, Diara pulled off her top and bared her chest before him. Unos went completely still, stunned beyond measure. The memory of her form hit him like a spark to dry tinder. After a brief, tense silence, she calmly covered herself again. Unos stood confused, torn between disbelief and curiosity. Was this some gesture of thanks, or was she mocking him, acknowledging the way he'd fixated on her before? The realization dawned. She knew his gaze always betrayed him. He wanted to apologize right then, but couldn't find the words. Instead, Diara knelt and lifted her staff, tracing lines into the soil. Unos leaned down and watched as an image began to take shape, the outline of a snake. His thoughts flashed immediately to the shadow viper. Could she be warning him, asking something of him? Diara gestured with her hands, first to herself, then her comrades, and finally, to him. She ended by striking her staff against the image of the snake. Then she extended her hand toward him, palm open, a desperate plea. Edward gawked in disbelief, whispering if she'd lost her mind. But Unos understood. She wanted his help, to fight the serpent. He could feel the urgency radiating from her. It must have taken everything she had to lower her pride and ask him, of all beings. Once he might have helped for connection's sake, to feel human again. But not anymore. Orlando shouted angrily, calling her mad for bargaining with a monster. Diara snapped back, voice sharp, telling him to shut his mouth. Unos blinked in surprise upon hearing her speak fluent Canaanite. She declared that she'd do whatever it took to return home. She had given her word to Lena, and she would keep it. Orlando couldn't answer. Unos sat quietly for a moment, wondering what he would gain from this. But only a low growl escaped his throat before he plopped down cross-legged and began rummaging through his pack. Diara tilted her head, baffled, watching him curiously. He retrieved the glass bottle filled with a shimmering blue liquid, then raised his other hand, gesturing a number. 5, his gaze said silently. 5 bottles. Diara froze, realization dawning. He was negotiating. A deal. A deal. Her face paled as it sank in. For so long, everyone assumed monsters were mindless beasts. Yet this one just proposed an exchange. The world tilted for her in that moment. When she asked how many blue potions they had, Edward hesitated before admitting, only 2. Her own stock raised the total to 3. Diara knelt again and carefully placed the 3 bottles on the ground between them. Unos studied the vials. Small, precious, and decided that would suffice for now. Then, with deliberate slowness, he dug further into his pack and produced a green potion, holding up 2 fingers this time. Diara's eyes brightened. She understood instantly what he was asking for. She nodded and traced 2 more bottles into the dirt. The deal was struck. With a satisfied grin, Unos reached out and gently scooped Diara up with one massive hand, lifting her effortlessly into the air. Orlando and the rest froze in disbelief. Unos's movements were surprisingly gentle as he set her onto his shoulder. Diara didn't struggle. Her calm and composure under his touch showed her resolve. For the first time, Unos recognized the depth of her courage. When she wobbled slightly, she leaned closer for balance, pressing herself lightly against the side of his head. The gesture froze him again, but it also anchored something within him, recognition, perhaps affection. Then he realized she had become his number 7's, his 7th connection, rare and precious. Diara quietly told him to be cautious. The tension dissolved into uncertain peace. She then leapt off his shoulder with a graceful motion, landing lightly and declaring, "The deal's complete." Orlando could hardly accept it. A human bargaining with a monster. It defied everything they knew. We're really trusting this thing? He muttered bitterly. Diara met his eyes, voice unwavering. "I don't know," she said, "but I won't sit here and die the way they want us to." And in that single sentence, her defiance burned brighter than fear.